Chapter 23:12. A scarlet light flew out and enveloped Nanjinshu. A terrifying pressure descended upon him, encircling his entire body and forming a barrier. Clang. A wave of energy repelled Chu Liyue's star darkness sword. Chu Liyue was shocked and quickly retreated. However, the star darkness sword couldn't completely avoid the attack. The sword trembled, almost numbing Chu Liyue's hand. Did the first divine emissary attack? Chu Liyue frowned. He suppressed the surging aura in his chest and looked at Nanjinshu. Nanjinshu was overjoyed. First divine emissary. The seal flew out of his hand and floated in the air. An endless amount of pressure and power spread out from it. Chu Liyue narrowed his eyes. The seal contained the first divine emissary's aura. No wonder Nanjinshu was so confident. First divine emissary. Did you see that? The xuanhuan is extremely bold. Not only did she barge into the illusionary god sea, but she also turned this place upside down. She even forced me to tell her the whereabouts of the third zither score. Nanjinshu was excited. He felt like he had found a savior and hurriedly told him everything that Chu Liyue had done. She's so bold and arrogant. She doesn't care about you at all. She doesn't respect the illusionary god palace at all. First divine emissary, you must punish her severely as a warning to others. Nanjinshu couldn't be blamed for being so angry. After all, a sword was pressed against his neck just a moment ago. His life was hanging by a thread. Now that he finally had a chance to counterattack, he naturally wouldn't let it go. He wanted nothing more than to ask the first divine emissary to kill Chu Liyue personally. However, in the next moment, a cold and deep voice rang out from the talisman, causing Nanjinshu to be stunned. Nanjinshu, what did you say to her just now? Every word was cold and deep, like an interrogation. His tone was filled with undisguised anger. Nanjinshu was stunned. What did he say just now? No, he told Chu Liyue about the third score. His entire body was covered in cold sweat. First messenger, I didn't do it on purpose. Xuanhuan has been forcing me? This matter was extremely confidential, which was why the first divine emissary was willing to meet him and gave him the qualifications to cultivate in the illusionary god sea. If it was any other day, Nanjinshu wouldn't have mentioned it so casually. But just now, Chu Liyue's sword was on his neck. He was angry and scared. In a moment of impulse, he actually blurted it out. He didn't expect the first oracle to know about it. Chu Liyue narrowed his eyes when he heard the voice. This voice was very unfamiliar, but the tone, it was strangely familiar. He felt like he had heard it somewhere before. Nanjinshu was afraid that he would be punished. He quickly shifted the blame to Chu Liyue. First divine emissary, if she hadn't forced me, I wouldn't have said these things. Furthermore, the first two pieces of music are indeed with her. She had broken so many taboos. Just this alone should be enough to punish her, right? However, the first divine emissary didn't seem to listen to Nanjinshu. Both of you, leave the illusionary god sea immediately. From now on, you are not allowed to come back. Nanjinshu was stunned. First divine emissary, what do you mean? He didn't mind. He had made a mistake and should be punished. But what about Chu Liyue? First divine emissary, she. Before he could finish his sentence, the first divine emissary's voice came from the talisman again. Nanjinshu, do you have any objections? His voice was very soft, but it made Nanjinshu shiver. He hurriedly said, I wouldn't dare. No matter how unhappy he was with this result, he knew that he couldn't show it. Wasn't going against the first divine emissary suicidal? No matter how much Nanjinshu hated Chu Liyue and how much he wanted her to die here, he still had a brain. The first divine emissary clearly didn't intend to kill her. Other than chasing her out of the illusionary god sea, there wasn't any other punishment. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of the two scores? After all, the talisman had already recognized her as its master. It wasn't feasible to take it by force. Nanjinshu thought about it and felt that this was the only answer. He suppressed the surging emotions in his heart and cupped his fists. Jinshu will leave now. After that, he gave Chu Liyue a deep look before heading up to the sea. However, the talisman didn't leave with him. It just hung there quietly. It was only a few steps away from Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue stared at the talisman and suddenly asked, First divine emissary, have we met before? The talisman didn't answer. Several rays of red light swirled around, stirring up waves. Swoosh. The scattered stones finally returned to Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue had a thought and put them all back into her universe ring. Then the talisman quietly dissipated. It transformed into a crimson light that covered everything below. Chu Liyue's eyes narrowed. This red light was exactly the same as the Red Moon Desert. She clenched her fists and finally turned to leave. What? The sound of water splashing attracted the attention of the people on the silver bridge. Countless pairs of eyes immediately gathered in that direction. They saw a figure rushing out of the water and heading in their direction. Nanjinshu. Why is he the one coming out? Isn't he supposed to cultivate in the illusionary god sea? It hasn't even been a day. Is it over? His expression doesn't look right. After Nanjinshu came out, he was shocked to see so many people gathered on the silver bridge. Those gazes made him extremely embarrassed. However, he couldn't go back now. He could only brace himself and go forward. Soon he arrived on the silver bridge as well. The moment his feet touched the ground, he didn't stop and immediately headed toward the heavenly gate above him. There was no expression on his face. He exuded a dangerous and cold aura that kept people at arm's length. Anyone with eyes could see that he was in an extremely bad mood at this moment. The people around him quieted down. However, not everyone was wary of him. For example, Mu Hongyu. She quickly arrived in front of Nanjinshu and stopped him. Nanjinshu, where's Lu Yu? Nanjinshu knew who she was talking about. His expression immediately turned ugly. What does it have to do with me? If you want to know, why don't you go and see for yourself? He hated Chu Liwe to the core. Even hearing her name made him grit his teeth. Mu Hongyu raised her chin. How troublesome. You're all in the illusionary god sea anyway. What's wrong with me asking? Everything had been fine earlier. However, for some reason she suddenly couldn't see what was going on below. She was worried. Of course, she had to ask Nanjinshu about it. Suddenly, she narrowed her eyes and asked curiously, why is there a sword wound on your neck? Chapter 23:13. It would have been better if Nanjinshu hadn't mentioned it. In fact, it was only a very shallow wound. The skin was slightly broken and a faint trace of blood seeped out. It would recover in 2 or 3 days. However, it constantly reminded Nanjinshu of the humiliation he had suffered in front of Chu Liwe. He raised his hand to touch his neck and snorted coldly. If you don't want any trouble, you'd better leave now. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that there won't be more injuries on your body. He was clearly threatening Nanjinshu. He couldn't defeat Chu Liwe, but it wouldn't be a problem for him to deal with Mu Hongyu, who was only a high god. However, Mu Hongyu didn't care at all. Mu Hongyu blinked when she saw the man's angry expression. Patriarch Nan, why are you so angry? Could it be that Lu Yu is the one who gave you this injury? Nanjinshu was even more furious. He waved his hand and formed a sharp blade with his divine power. It went straight for Mu Hongyu. The two of them were only a step away from each other. Even an honorable god of the same level might not be able to dodge his sudden attack in time, let alone a high god. Swish! The sharp blade pierced through Mu Hongyu's chest. The crowd exclaimed. However, the next moment they saw that Mu Hongyu had disappeared. That was clearly just her afterimage. Nanjinshu's heart had just been filled with joy when he saw this scene and was taken aback. Then, a hand gently patted his shoulder from behind. Patriarch Nan, you're not strong enough. Nanjinshu's hair stood on end. He immediately turned around. Mu Hongyu was standing behind him with a smile. How did you? Before he could ask, Mu Hongyu threw a punch. It landed on Nanjinshu's face. Bang! With a dull thud, Nanjinshu felt dizzy and stumbled a few steps back, almost falling to the ground. When Mu Hongyu threw this punch, it affected the power of the surrounding space and created a great pressure on Nanjinshu. That was why he was able to catch Nanjinshu off guard so easily. Nanjinshu felt a dull pain all over his face. Something was flowing out from his nose and the corner of his mouth. He wiped it off and looked down. The blood was thick and red. His hands began to tremble slightly. The surrounding onlookers revealed strange expressions when they saw this. What was going on? Wasn't Mu Hongyu a high deity? After exchanging blows with Nanjinshu, not only was he not injured, but he even managed to beat Nanjinshu to such a state? Mu Hongyu clicked her tongue and shook her head. Nan family head, you don't seem to be in a good condition. Why do you have to force yourself? I'm just asking you a question. Can't you just answer me honestly? Now you've added new wounds to your old wounds. Look, what do you want? Nanjinshu was about to explode from anger. Mu Hongyu touched her ear. Hey, I'm listening. You! At this moment, another figure dashed out of the illusionary god ocean. Xuanhuan is out. Someone in the crowd exclaimed. Mu Hongyu quickly turned around. When she saw that it was Chu Liwe, she heaved a sigh of relief and waved happily. Lu Yu? Chu Luiyue was also very fast. He arrived at the silver bridge in the blink of an eye. Mu Hongyu hurried forward and looked Chu Luiyue up and down. "Luiyue, are you alright?" Just now, a mysterious and powerful force had suddenly appeared and blocked her perception, causing her to be quite worried. When she saw that Nanjinshu had returned first and was injured, she was even more worried about what had happened below. Chu Luiyue smiled. "I'm fine." Mu Hongyu heaved a sigh of relief after confirming that she was really not injured. That's good, that's good." Chu Luiyue looked up and saw Nanjinshu covering his nose with blood all over his face. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. What happened to the Nan family master? He had only arrived a little earlier than her. Why was he injured again? Mu Hongyu coughed. "I asked him about your situation just now. Not only did he refuse to tell me, but he even wanted to hit me. I had no choice but to retaliate." She sounded quite aggrieved. Everyone was speechless. Nanjinshu's forehead twitched. This Mu Hongyu was really good at distorting the truth. Upon hearing this, Chu Luiyue's expression turned cold. "Nanjinshu, did you attack Hongyu just now?" Nanjinshu could not deny it. He gritted his teeth and said, "So what if I did? But she's not." Before he could say the word injured, Chu Luiyue quickly went forward and harshly kicked Nanjinshu's chest. Nanjinshu instinctively wanted to block it. However, he was not as fast as Chu Luiyue. There was a flash of light. Chu Luiyue kicked Nanjinshu with his long legs and accurately hit him. Bam! Nanjinshu did not even have time to set up a barrier before he was sent flying. Everyone hurriedly moved aside. Nanjinshu fell onto the silver bridge with a loud thud. He spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale. When Chu Luiyue attacked, she specially summoned her divine body. Hence, this attack almost took half of Nanjinshu's life. Everyone retreated further when they saw that. Chu Luiyue did not hold back. If they continued to fight, it would not be good for them to bleed. No one was worried about Nanjinshu's condition. On one hand, most of the cultivators in the illusionary god palace were focused on cultivation. Most of them were not close to each other. On the other hand, Nanjinshu had entered the illusionary god palace immediately after he arrived. He did not have much contact with them, let alone anything else. "I didn't attack you just now because you're the first divine envoy. However, that doesn't mean I'm a pushover." Chu Luiyue dusted his clothes and said mildly. Everyone was shocked when they heard that. The first divine envoy? What happened down there that involved the first divine envoy? Next time, before you attack, please consider whether you have the ability to do so. Otherwise, if you fail and get beaten up, where will you hide your face in the future? Nanjinshu was so angry that he could not speak. He spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood. He was already weaker than Chu Luiyue. Now that he was beaten up by Chu Luiyue and Mu Hongyu, he was even more miserable. Many people looked at each other and secretly exchanged glances. Chu Luiyue's words were really interesting. Nanjinshu had entered the illusionary god palace immediately, met the first divine envoy, and obtained permission to cultivate in the illusionary god ocean. Everyone thought that the first divine envoy would take good care of him. However, why did Chu Luiyue not seem to be worried about causing trouble for himself after beating up Nanjinshu? Chapter 23:14. Chu Luiyue then turned to Mu Hongyu. "Hongyu, let's go back." Mu Hongyu immediately replied, "Okay." Then the two of them really went straight to the divine gate. Mu Hongyu even wrinkled her nose at Nanjinshu when they walked past him. So that's all there is to a supreme god powerhouse. Although she was only a supreme god now, she had broken through to the initial realization realm. Her combat power was on par with a supreme god powerhouse. Nanjinshu choked. His vision turned black and he almost fainted from anger. However, the two of them couldn't be bothered with him. They went straight to the divine gate and stepped through it. Their figures quickly disappeared behind the flickering barrier, leaving behind a group of dumbfounded people standing in the same place. They really went back? Just like that? Speaking of which, xuanhuan stayed in the illusionary god ocean for a few hours. How did she come out unscathed? That's not all. She even beat Nanjinshu up. The first messenger is in charge of the illusionary god ocean. Logically speaking, he should know what happened here, right? Why didn't he punish xuanhuan? The weird thing is, I thought Nanjinshu really had the first messenger as his backer. But it seems like that's not the case. If the first messenger really had the intention to support Nanjinshu, this wouldn't have happened. All sorts of discussions entered Nanjinshu's ears, making him very frustrated. Of course, he wanted to know why this was happening. Even if he couldn't kill her for the zither score, there were many ways to punish her. But none. Chu Luiyue was so presumptuous and had done so many outrageous things in the illusionary god ocean. The first messenger didn't punish her other than ordering her to stay away from the illusionary god ocean. Nan Jinshu couldn't figure it out. That person wasn't easy to talk to. Otherwise, the other messengers wouldn't be so afraid of him. But this time, it was really strange. Nan Jinshu forced himself to stand up. No matter what, he couldn't stay here any longer. He had to return to the illusionary god palace as soon as possible. Chu Luiyue and Mu Hongyu crossed the barrier and headed towards their residence. Mu Hongyu looked back and asked curiously, "What's the matter? Luyu, did you really leave that wound on Nanjinshu's neck? You guys actually started fighting under the illusionary god sea?" Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment, then said, "Not really. It was just an exchange of pointers, but they didn't fight. To be precise, she had single-handedly attacked Nanjinshu. Unfortunately, the first oracle had arrived too quickly and did not have time to ask about the whereabouts of the third score. After that, it would probably be difficult for him to ask again. Fortunately, this trip wasn't completely fruitless." Mu Hongyu nodded in understanding. "That's right. Originally, I was watching the illusionary god sea very well. In the end, I don't know why, but it suddenly stopped. It was as if something was blocking it." Chu Luiyue smiled. "Since the first divine envoy has made his move, it will naturally be difficult for you to investigate." Mu Hongyu's almond-shaped eyes widened. "Did the first divine envoy really go? Why didn't I see him?" "He didn't come in person. The seal that Nan Jinshu brought over contained a trace of the first divine envoy's aura. He came out when he sensed what Nan Jinshu and I were doing." "I see. I knew that the power was very strong." Mu Hongyu finally figured out this problem and understood a lot more. "I've long heard that the first divine envoy is very powerful. It seems like it's true. He only sealed a trace of his aura in the seal, and it was already so powerful that it could easily cover the entire illusionary god sea. It was hard to imagine how powerful he was. That's why I wanted to meet him. Unfortunately, this kind of opportunity is hard to come by." Chu Luiyue was not only amazed by the first oracle's power, but she also wanted to know something. She wanted to know if she had any history with the first oracle. At first, she didn't take it to heart, but later that familiar feeling lingered in her heart. The strangest thing was that after Nan Jinshu left, she asked if they had met before, but the first oracle didn't answer. He didn't admit it, but he didn't deny it either. Of course, it was also possible that he didn't care to answer Chu Luiyue's question. But for some reason, Chu Luiyue didn't think that was very likely. She raised her head and looked into the distance at the towering illusory god palace. She would go in eventually. Nan Jinshu returned to the illusionary god palace in a fluster. He had just returned to his residence when he saw someone waiting for him at the door. He was shocked. "The eighth divine envoy? Why are you here?" Xu Jing smiled. "I'm here to wait for you." As she spoke, she glanced at Nan Jinshu, but she was not surprised at all. In fact, she had already known about what had happened outside 15 minutes ago. Nan Jinshu was instantly embarrassed and lowered her head subconsciously as she was being scrutinized by her. "I wonder why the eighth divine envoy has suddenly come here?" Xu Jing didn't answer his question. Instead, she sighed. "It seems that Xuanhuan is more arrogant and despotic than the rumors." Nan Jinshu was furious when he heard this. He let down his guard against Xu Jing. He wiped the blood from the corner of his lips. "She has always been like this. Master Nan, didn't you take the first oracle's seal to the illusionary god ocean? Why did Xuanhuan bully you like this? Is she looking down on you, or does she not care about the first oracle at all?" Xu Jing asked purposely. Offending Nan Jinshu wasn't a big deal, but offending the first oracle was a serious crime. She thought that Nan Jinshu would be furious and would complain to the first divine emissary. However, Nan Jinshu's expression changed several times before he finally said, "Don't worry, Mississippi." Finally, he said, "Eighth divine envoy, did you come here just to tell me this?" Xu Jing was stunned. Nan Jinshu's reaction didn't seem right. While she was thinking, Nan Jinshu continued. "The first divine envoy has already made his decision. Naturally, we can only listen to him," said the first divine envoy. Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. She finally realized that the first oracle already knew about this. But the current situation was his choice. The first oracle didn't punish Chu Luiyue? Xu Jing couldn't believe it, but Nan Jinshu didn't want to talk about it anymore. "Eighth oracle, if there's nothing else." "Of course there is." Xu Jing quickly reacted and suppressed the shock and confusion in her heart. "The sixth oracle wants to see Master Nan." Nan Jinshu was stunned. "The sixth oracle? No. Xu Jing nodded and smiled. Master Nan, please follow me. This didn't give Nan Jinshu the right to refuse. Digression, 6 p.m. Chapter 23:15. At this moment, Chu Luiyue and Mu Hongyu returned to their residence. After the two entered the room together, Chu Luiyue found a pen and paper and drew the spatial layout under the illusionary god Si for Mu Hongyu. This was actually very difficult. Under the illusionary god Si, countless spaces intertwined and overlapped, and were constantly changing. Even 1/10 of it could not be represented by the drawing on the paper. Fortunately, after the stones rolled out, they each froze a part of the space with the divine realm, which helped Chu Luiyue a lot. In addition, Mu Hongyu stood on the silver bridge and watched for a long time, so she was aware of the situation under the illusionary god Si. Therefore she could understand it. After a while, Chu Luiyue finally stopped writing and handed over the map in her hand. Mu Hongyu took it and glanced at it. She was surprised. Luyu, how do you know so much? These were all invisible and intangible. Her control of space was not top-notch, so it was reasonable to say that she could not give such a map. Chu Luiyue was about to speak when she saw Changwan Zhou come to the door with tea in his hand. She smiled and waved. Little Zhou, come in. Changwan Zhou walked in, came to Chu Luiyue's side and poured her tea. It was the familiar taste of ginger tea. Chu Luiyue reached for the cup. The temperature was just right. She took a sip and her lungs instantly warmed up. A unique fragrance with a hint of bitterness gradually diffused. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes comfortably, and her bright eyes almost curved into a crescent moon. Not to mention anything else, Xiao Zhou had always done well in these matters. However, he was now a god. It was really a waste of talent to serve her like this. Chu Luiyue held the tea and said, Little Zhou, don't do these things in the future. Changwan Zhou froze and a trace of panic flashed in his eyes. Master thinks I didn't do well? Chu Luiyue hurriedly waved his hand. Of course not. However, with your current status, doing this is really a waste of time and energy. These are only trivial matters. Master's matter is not a trivial matter. Changwan Zhou pursed his lips and interrupted her, which was rare of him. Chu Luiyue was stunned. She looked up and saw his stubborn face. How stubborn? Chu Luiyue sighed in her heart and could only say, then, just pretend I didn't say anything? Changwan Zhou gently nodded. A few strands of messy golden hair hung down from his forehead, covering the ripples in his eyes. Only his rose petal-like lips, which were slightly raised, revealed some of his emotions. Chu Luiyue helplessly held her forehead and smiled. Forget it. He could do whatever he wanted. Now that he had become a god, he was no longer as easily bullied as before. Chu Luiyue retracted his gaze and looked at Mu Hongyu. Here's what happened. Then he told Mu Hongyu everything that had happened in the illusory god Si. Mu Hongyu was shocked and couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. So your stones can suppress the space turbulence in the illusory god Si? Chu Luiyue shook his head. Strictly speaking, it's not suppression. At most, it's just temporary. After all, those are the divine realms of the great gods, and their power is limited. She could feel that there was an extremely shocking power in the illusory god Si. It was not something she could resist at the moment. But at that time this power had not erupted. Mu Hongyu was stunned for a while. Suddenly, she remembered something and asked in a low voice. What if it's the gravestone of the great gods? She knew the origin of the pile of stones. Chu Luiyue had gone to the Godslayer mound and obtained them from the tombs of the great gods. According to Chu Luiyue, there were not only tombs of the great gods, but also of the great gods. Hearing her say this, Chu Luiyue was also dazed. I really didn't think about it before. When she went to the Godslayer mound, her strength was limited, so she only stayed in the tombs of the great gods for a while. As for the area of the great gods, she really didn't go there. Normally, the gravestone of the great gods should contain more power, but no one can guarantee that the situation there will be the same as the great gods' tombs. Chu Luiyue murmured. Back then, these stones had taken the initiative to follow her, but who could be sure that the same thing would happen a second time? The great gods were much more powerful than the great gods. Mu Hongyu wrinkled her nose. What if she could really bring back the gravestone of the great gods, then it wouldn't be a problem for Chu Luiyue to deal with the Mirage God Ocean. Chu Luiyue tapped her hand on the armrest and fell into deep thought. Mu Hongyu's words made sense. After all, she didn't expect these stones to choose to follow her. Maybe she should find some time to go to the Godslayer mound again? Once she succeeded, her battle prowess would rise to the extreme. Chu Luiyue was tempted. The Palace of the Mirage God. Nan Jinshu followed Xu Jing to the residence of the sixth oracle. As soon as he entered the courtyard, Nan Jinshu smelled a faint, bitter medicinal fragrance. He felt a little strange. The sixth oracle didn't seem to be a celestial physician. Why would there be a medicinal smell here? Xu Jing turned to look at him and said, "The sixth oracle came back recently. The sixth divine emissary has just returned from outside and is currently recuperating. You just have to answer whatever he asks later." Nan Jinshu immediately said, "Yes." Only then did Xu Jing step forward and knock on the door. "Sixth oracle, Patriarch Nan is here." A moment later, a hoarse voice came from inside. "Come in." Xu Jing gestured at Nan Jinshu with his chin. Nan Jinshu was startled and pointed at himself. "I'll go in alone? Won't the eighth oracle come with me?" Xu Jing smiled. "The sixth oracle wants to talk to Patriarch Nan in private. I won't disturb you." Nan Jinshu was a little nervous, but he nodded and went in. Xu Jing closed the door. Creak. Nan Jinshu felt inexplicably nervous as he listened. He had been here for a while, and this was the first time a oracle wanted to see him. "Nan Jinshu." The voice came from behind the screen. Nan Jinshu cupped his fists and bowed. "Greetings, sixth oracle. Are you sure the third music score is in the god-slaying tomb?" Nan Jinshu was stunned. At first, he found it strange that the sixth divine emissary knew about this. However, after thinking about it, he realized that the first divine emissary had already sent someone to investigate. He nodded. "Yes. Did you tell Xuanhuan about this?" "Of course not." Nan Jinshu said hurriedly. "This is a serious matter. How would I dare to tell her about it?" "That's good. As long as you know what you're doing. Besides, I heard that she went to the illusionary god ocean without permission." "Yes. This woman is very daring. Did the first oracle know about this?" Chapter 23:16. Nan Jinshu paused and said hesitantly. "This counts, but it doesn't. At that time, I brought the seal of the first divine envoy to the illusionary god sea. When I clashed with Xuanhuan, the aura of the first divine envoy gushed out from the seal and chased us out of the illusionary god sea." "The first oracle didn't show up?" "No." Nan Jinshu was puzzled. "The first oracle is in charge of the illusionary god sea. Even if he doesn't show up personally, he can easily find out everything that happens in the illusionary god sea. Besides, such a small matter shouldn't require the first oracle to make a move, right? Actually, this matter might be a big deal to him and Chuluiwe, but it was definitely nothing to the first oracle. The illusionary god sea was boundless and vast. At most, the two of them were just messing around. Why would the first oracle make a special trip for this matter? Just the seal alone was enough to solve the problem. "When you went to meet the first oracle, did you see him in person?" the sixth oracle suddenly asked. Nan Jinshu hesitated. No. Outsiders thought that he had entered the courtyard and must have seen the first oracle. But in reality he had just stood outside the door and said a few words. He didn't even see that person's shadow. He didn't dare to hide anything in front of the sixth oracle. As expected. The sixth oracle murmured as if he had expected this, but he also seemed a little unwilling. Nan Jinshu almost thought that he was hallucinating. Why did it sound like the sixth oracle wanted the first oracle to appear personally? And he seemed to have expected that the first oracle wouldn't meet him? "You said that the first oracle came out to stop the two of you as soon as the conflict broke out?" "Yes." Nan Jinshu described the situation at that time. Of course he added some details, but he didn't know that Mo Shurqian was completely uninterested behind the screen. What he wanted to know was the first oracle's attitude towards Chuluiwe. What kind of place is the illusionary god sea? In the past 10,000 years, 90% of the cultivators who trespassed there died and were buried at the bottom of the sea. As for the remaining 10%, even if they were lucky enough to escape, they would inevitably be severely punished. Even if they didn't die, they would be half dead. However, when it comes to her, it's different. He sneered coldly with a hint of mockery. Nan Jinshu felt a little uncomfortable when he heard this voice. But at this time he didn't have time to think about this. His focus was the same as the sixth divine envoy's. "Sixth divine envoy, do you also find this matter strange? I originally thought that the first god's emissary wouldn't let Xuanhuan off the hook so easily, but who would have thought that he wouldn't be punished at all? What do you think the first oracle is thinking?" "The thoughts of the first divine envoy are not something that we can guess." "This?" Nan Jinshu frowned. He could hear that the sixth divine emissary seemed to be very concerned about this matter, but perhaps because he was afraid, he did not continue to speak. "All right, you can go back." Jianghu was at a loss when the sixth divine emissary suddenly asked him to leave. Was he letting him go just like that? Could it be that the sixth emissary had asked him to come here just to ask about this? But, the sixth divine envoy, get out. That voice carried an unquestionable pressure. Jianghu's heart skipped a beat. He didn't dare to ask any more questions and quickly retreated. Mu Hongyu left with the map that Chu Luiyue had drawn. She still needed to go back and take a closer look at the situation below the illusionary god ocean. Also, she had to break through to the Mahayana realm as soon as possible. After Mu Hongyu left, Chu Luiyue asked Xiao Zhou to leave as well. She sat alone in her room to think. Now, there were a lot of things that she needed to solve. She hadn't finished her star path yet. This was the fastest and most suitable way for her to enter the illusionary god palace openly. Su Li had been in the illusionary god palace for a while and would carefully investigate the situation from time to time. But after all, she was under the watchful eyes of the god's emissaries. There were many things that Su Li did not dare to go overboard with, so the information that she could find was limited. Until now, there were still no clues as to the whereabouts of Dugu Mabao and Lan Xiao. Chu Luiyue could basically conclude that the two of them were trapped in an extremely secretive location in the illusionary god palace. It would be impossible to rely on Su Li alone to find them. She still had to go in. At the same time, the third Guqin score was also very important to her. She had to think of a way to get information from Jianghu. If she guessed correctly, the third Guqin score was still in the Divine Ruins world. And the two gods' emissaries, Jiu Long and Shi Yan, who had left earlier, were probably looking for the last Guqin score. Unfortunately, the two of them had already disappeared without a trace, leaving no clues behind. And Diwu Xianxia, who was trapped in the illusionary god ocean. What kind of person was the first god's emissary? You are. A low and pleasant voice sounded. Chu Luiyue turned around and saw Rong Xiu walking in. He came in front of Chu Luiyue. Seeing her frown, he reached out and smoothed her brows. What are you thinking about? Why are you so tired? Chu Luiyue held his hand and rubbed her face against the back of his hand. It's still those. Rong Xiu smiled and hugged her. He leaned over and kissed her hair. Tell me about it. Miss Xuanhuan. I have something to do. Zhao, who had just walked to the door, was originally smiling. But when he saw the cold and noble figure hugging Chu Luiyue in the room, he was shocked and stunned. Why was she here? Chapter 23:17. The most important thing was that he seemed to have come at the wrong time. When the two people in the room heard the voice, they both looked outside the door. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. This is... Ming's heart trembled violently. He originally wanted to run away, but it was obviously too late now. If he wanted to go in, he really couldn't move his legs. Chu Luiyue raised the corners of his lips slightly. Lord Ming, why are you here? Please come in. He didn't dare to disobey Madame's orders. Silently holding his breath, he walked stiffly and braced himself to enter the house. Chu Luiyue stood up. Rong Xiu, let me introduce you. This is Lord Ming of Zhenbao Pavilion. He usually treats me very well and has helped me a lot before. Rong Xiu's thin scarlet lips curled into a smile. I see. Lord Ming, I've heard a lot about you. Ming Shu's legs went soft. He barely restrained his urge to kneel down and bow. He forced a smile. You flatter me. I've heard a lot about you too. Ah. Rong Xiu laughed. Since Lord Ming has taken good care of you as her husband, I naturally have to thank you properly. Ming Shu repeatedly said that he didn't dare. But it's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. At this moment he was extremely grateful to the second master. If it weren't for that person's reminder, he wouldn't know when he had offended Madame. How could he stand in front of this person and talk to him like this? Chu Luiyue raised his hand. Lord Ming, please sit down. You can talk slowly. How could Ming Shu dare to sit down? He coughed, waved his hand and said, No need, no need. I'm here today because I have something to tell you. I'll leave after that. Chu Luiyue looked at Ming Shu and felt that he was a little strange today. He seemed very nervous. It must be a big matter for you to personally solve the case. Please speak. Ming Shu tried his best to make himself look as calm and composed as he usually did. He said, It's like this. I came here this time to ask you if you've been in contact with Mu Yafeng recently. Chu Luiyue was stunned. Mu Yafeng? No, what? You frowned. Actually, it's nothing much. It's just that Mu Yafeng has continued to walk the star path since yesterday. Furthermore, in a short span of one day, he had broken through 3 great Grandmaster Xian formations. I thought it was a little strange, so I thought I'd come over to ask you. Lord Ji thinks that I revealed the contents of the mythical flame diagram to her? Chu Luiyue immediately understood. Please don't misunderstand. Zhao hurriedly explained, I just feel that this matter is really strange, so I wanted to ask you for confirmation. After all, those Xin formations were extremely difficult to decipher. Previously she didn't make any progress for such a long time, but now she suddenly improved by leaps and bounds. Chu Luiyue nodded in understanding. What Lord Ji said makes sense. Previously, Senior Xiaoran had also said that he had spent several years on those great grandmaster-level profound formations before he had barely comprehended them. Originally, according to his speculation, Mu Yafeng should also need a long time to decipher this Xian formation. Previously, she was busy with the illusory god Si, so she didn't know that Mu Yafeng had made a move again. Now that she heard it, she also felt that it was very strange. The mythical flame diagram is a treasure of Treasure Pavilion. When I agreed to help copy it, I already knew the rules. I would never easily reveal it to outsiders. I didn't even reveal it to my subordinates. Lord Mingshu, you can rest assured about this. Yu hurriedly said, Of course I believe in your character. I have no intention of doubting you. Heavens! He was really just curious, so he came over to ask. Who knew that he would bump into this person? Wasn't this suspecting that there was something wrong with Madame? Even if he was given 10 more guts, he wouldn't dare to do this. If he had known that this person was here, he would never have stepped into this courtyard. Chu Luiyue smiled. I know that Lord Yu has no ill intentions. Actually, it's not just you. I also feel that it's a little strange. Mu Yafeng's talent is not bad, but with her own strength, it is indeed impossible for her to decipher 3 Grandmaster Xian formations in such a short time. Chu Luiyue's words were tactful. In fact, it should be said that it was absolutely impossible. If she had this ability, she wouldn't have dragged her feet on the Star Passage for so many years. In the eyes of many people in the illusory God Palace, Mu Yafeng was already a rare genius. But in Chu Luiyue's opinion, it was fine. Ming Shu heaved a sigh of relief and said, Not only that. She hasn't finished yet. She's still on the Star Passage. When I came here just now, I passed by and took a few glances. There was a bit of an irresistible force. Chu Luiyue was a little surprised. You mean, she plans to directly finish the Star Passage and enter the illusory God Palace? Ming Shu paused. It's hard to say, but if her performance is still like this, then, it might really work. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. In fact, she didn't care much about Mu Yafeng. But this matter was really strange. Otherwise, she wouldn't have made a special trip. I'm here today mainly to talk about this matter. It's up to you how you think. Ming Shu said. Chu Luiyue nodded. Thank you for reminding me, Lord Yu. Ming Shu waved his hand. Then, if there's nothing else, I'll leave first. There are still some things to deal with in the Treasure Pavilion. Hearing this, Chu Luiyue didn't ask him to stay. I'll send you off. No need, no need. I took the liberty to disturb the two of you. I'll leave now. How dare he really let the two of them send him off? As he spoke, he walked outside. Take care, Lord Yu. Rong Xiu said lightly. Ming Shu staggered, but a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. He steadied himself and looked up. Suddenly, the corner of his eyes twitched. Yin Qing stood with his sword in his arms. There was no expression on his handsome and cold face. He just looked at him quietly. Yu quickly swallowed the rest of his words, nodded slightly, and hurried away. For some reason, his footsteps became faster. Almost in the blink of an eye, he had already opened the gate of the courtyard and slipped away. In such a hurry. Chu Luiyue looked at Yu's back and muttered in a low voice. The person he just mentioned, is she the one who asked you for the mythical flame diagram? Rong Xiu tilted his head and asked. Chu Luiyue nodded thoughtfully. That's her. However, based on my understanding of her, she shouldn't be able to do such a thing. Even if she went back to cultivate in seclusion for a while, she shouldn't have advanced by leaps and bounds. The 7th Oracle values her very much. I don't know if she went to consult him. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly and said lightly. The 7th Oracle really doesn't have good taste. Chapter 23:18. His tone was light and indifferent, extremely natural. Chu Luiyue glanced at him, wrinkled her nose, and smiled. There aren't many people who dare to say that the 7th Divine Emissary has no foresight. The Divine Emissaries had a very high status in the illusory God Palace. Many people would be extra careful when talking about them, let alone such a straightforward judgment. Rong Xiu bent his finger and lightly scratched her nose. Am I wrong? He's a Xian master himself. It's impossible that he can't see my Yuer's talent. Chu Luiyue shrugged and sighed. Isn't it because you don't have a bloodline totem? From the first day she came here, she deeply understood how much contempt and ridicule she would face without a bloodline totem. Rongxio's eyes narrowed slightly as his finger lightly brushed across her forehead. Chu Liyue's heart moved. She leaned closer and whispered, Rongxio, the infinite divine dial, can only test people with bloodline power? Rongxio looked at her. After a moment he said, of course. Bang. A stream of light flew up and quickly bloomed into an extremely brilliant Xian formation. Mu Yafeng looked up with unconcealable excitement in her eyes. The fourth one. This was already the fourth Xian formation she had cracked in a row on the Star Road this time. And it only took her less than 2 days. Not far behind her, many people were watching. Seeing that she had successfully cracked another Xian formation, the crowd instantly became restless. What's wrong with Mu Yafeng? Why did she suddenly become so powerful? The further she goes, the more complicated the Xian formation is. I remember that she was trapped in a Xian formation for a long time and couldn't crack it in the end, so she had no choice but to give up. How long has it been? She's back again and her progress is so smooth. Her talent has always been outstanding. Maybe she suddenly had an epiphany. If this continues, she can really comprehend all the Xian formations and officially enter the illusory god palace, right? I thought it would be Xuanhuan. Haha. What a joke. Xuanhuan is very powerful, but she doesn't have a bloodline totem. It won't be her turn, right? That's true, but other than that she's really powerful. Didn't you guys hear that she went to the illusory god ocean and came back safe and sound? She even beat Nanjinshu. If she didn't have the confidence, would she dare to do that? Mu Yafeng was in a good mood when she heard the envy and admiration of the people in front of her. However, the name that appeared later caused her eyes to turn cold. She was just because he had some talent that he dared to act so recklessly. I heard she was because she made demands of herself as the second divine emissary of God to the illusory god. She is really arrogant. The second oracle could tolerate her once or twice, but it was hard to say what would happen if she did it too many times. Mu Yafeng shook her head, dispelled the messy thoughts in her mind and continued forward. This time, no matter what, she had to complete the star path and enter the illusory god palace. In the courtyard, Rongxio and Chu Liyue sat facing each other. A translucent chessboard floated between them. On it, the two chess pieces were fighting fiercely. Chu Liyue stared at the chessboard and rubbed her chin. Ever since she read the mythical flame diagram and officially broke through to the great grandmaster realm, her Xian formation cultivation had improved greatly. But after fighting with Rongxio, she felt a deep sense of defeat. Now, no matter where she went, there was no way to reverse the situation. She was at the mercy of others. Master, there. Go there. An anxious voice came from behind her. Chu Liyue looked back helplessly. Little Hachi, how many times have I told you not to speak while watching the game? Can't you just paint your nails in peace? Little Hachi pursed her red lips and waved her hand. How can I be at ease when Master can't win? Look, it's all messed up. Chu Liyue. Are you complaining that your master is not good enough? Little Hachi narrowed her eyes and quickly smiled. Of course not. I'm doing this for your own good. Look, you've played with His Highness for so many years but you've only won a few times. Chu Liyue, I remember this clearly. I really don't need you to remind me. She raised her chin. You want me to go there? Little Hachi's eyes lit up. Yes. Then watch carefully. Swoosh. Chu Liyue flicked her finger, and a piece condensed from divine power flew out and landed on the spot Little Hachi pointed out. Rongxio's eyes were calm as he placed a piece. It was as if a sword had slashed down and completely sealed Chu Liyue's last path. Chu Liyue spread her hands. Did you see it clearly? If we do as you say, it will only make your master die faster. Little Hachi shrank her neck guiltily. Ahem, master, I haven't been learning for long. Of course, I can't compare with you and His Highness. I promise I won't say anything next time. Chu Liyue said. You said the same thing last time and the time before that. Little Hachi pursed her lips and made a sewing gesture. Chu Liyue gently knocked her forehead. You won't remember it anyway. She was used to it. Little Hachi's eyes were filled with tears. She really wanted to help her master win. At this moment, Shijing walked in from outside. Chu Liyue was a little surprised. Shijing, where did you go? She didn't see Shijing after returning from the illusionary god sea. Roy bowed to them one by one before explaining. Master, I went to the thunder pool. Chu Liyue was slightly stunned. Isn't the thunder pool sealed? Now there shouldn't be anyone in the illusionary god palace going there. Shijing chuckled. Yes, but I just went to the shore to take a look. I didn't do anything else. Chu Luiyue laughed. All the Tianlei in the thunder pool have been frozen. What's there to see? Xijing said. Nothing. Master, there are a lot of Tianlei in the thunder pool. The second oracle and the others only sealed the upper layer, but the lower ones are still fine. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Oh? How do you know? This matter was extremely confidential and hidden. Ordinary people definitely wouldn't be able to guess. Xijing paused. Just guessed. The Tianlei power below is still wandering around. If you stand close and take a closer look, you can see it. Chu Luiyue looked at him meaningfully. Xijing. Sigh. You. Chu Luiyue was about to speak when Sinyi suddenly pushed open the door and came out. Master. Seeing that his expression was different from before, Chu Luiyue knew that something must have happened, so she immediately asked, What's wrong? Sinyi came to her. Qihan sent a message saying that they met Jiu Long and Shi Yan in the god-slaying tomb. What? Chu Luiyue was shocked and stood up. Because she was too shocked, she didn't notice that Sinyi didn't call the two oracles but directly called them by their names. This Chu Luiyue, is there no end to it? Last time he said he was going to invite the weapon refining saint. Last time he said he was going to see Nanjinshu. What is it this time? Jin Yunlai didn't want to pay attention to him, but the gate of heaven was constantly moving. Chu Luiyue was determined to go out. After a while, Jin Yunlai finally couldn't help but stand up. However, before he could walk out, a voice suddenly came from afar. Jin Yunlai. Jin Yunlai was shocked when he heard the voice. The first divine envoy? Then, an illusory figure gradually appeared in front of him. However, the figure was shrouded in a layer of faint light, making it difficult to see his facial features. He could only barely make out a silhouette. Even so, Jin Yunlai recognized at a glance that it was indeed the first divine envoy. He took a quick glance and immediately looked away. He bowed his head and said respectfully, Greetings, first divine envoy. May I know why the first divine envoy is here today? Due to nervousness, Jin Yunlai's body was a little stiff. Ever since the first divine envoy went into seclusion, he had never stepped out of the courtyard. Although he did not appear with his true body and was only a strand of his aura, this was the first time he had done so. Don't you know why I'm here? The voice was low and indifferent, but it carried an invisible pressure. Jin Yunlai's chest tightened. He frowned and quickly searched his mind. Recently, he didn't seem to have done anything. Why did the first divine envoy sound like he was scolding him? Please enlighten me, first divine envoy. Bus. There was movement at the gate of heaven again. Jin Yunlai subconsciously turned his head to look. The first divine envoy had already made his move. Whoosh. A red stream of light flew out quickly and went straight to the gate of heaven. Jin Yunlai was shocked. The first divine envoy made his move personally? The Xian formations on the star passage can only be comprehended by oneself. Otherwise it will be regarded as cheating. Then Mu Yafeng, what's going on? Do you want me to continue asking? Jin Yunlai's heart sank. The crimson streak of light flashed through the air at high speed. It arrived at the gate of heaven in the blink of an eye. Chu Luiyue heard the movement and looked up. He felt a little strange. This is the first divine envoy's aura? Noticing this, a look of shock flashed across her eyes. Then the red stream of light landed on the barrier. The enchantment quietly opened. Chu Luiyue was stunned. After waiting for a while, Jin Yunlai didn't arrive. Instead, the first divine envoy made his move? What does he mean by this? Chu Luiyue couldn't figure it out for a moment. Warning? Reprimand? Rongxiu smiled faintly. Maybe the seventh divine envoy is busy. Digression? Very good. Someone in the comments section guessed part of the truth. 6 o'clock. Chapter 23:20. When Jin Yunlai did not show up, Chu Luiyue did not pay much attention to it. However, when the first god emissary suddenly made a move, she was very surprised. Could it be that he finally decided to come out of seclusion? But something like opening the gate of heaven, it seemed that no matter what, it was not his turn to do it. Rongxiu held her hand. There's no time to lose. Chu Luiyue retracted her gaze and gently nodded. The two figures quickly disappeared outside the gate of heaven. After a while, the barrier reassembled and was very calm. Chu Luiyue's departure did not attract the attention of the people in the illusory god palace. On one hand, many people's attention was on Mu Yafeng. On the other hand, the movement in the gate of heaven was too small. From the beginning to the end, only a short period of time had passed. Only the divine envoys who were guarding the various locations raised their heads in astonishment when they sensed this fluctuation. The first god emissary made a move. More importantly, he seemed to be at Jianyunlai's residence. In an instant, several god emissaries immediately moved out and headed towards Jianyunlai's direction. The first god emissary had been in seclusion for several years. Now that he finally made a move, they naturally had to go and check it out. Illusory God Palace. There was dead silence in the huge room. Jianyunlai stood there with her fists clenched. Most of her strength seemed to have been sucked out of her body. Even opening her mouth to speak was difficult. Her face was pale and her lips trembled slightly. She felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Every word of the first god emissary's questioning was heavy and cold. After a long time, she finally found her voice. I just gave her a little reminder. A little reminder? The first god emissary asked. Jianyunlai closed her eyes and finally said dejectedly, yes. I intentionally helped her. The gate of heaven will only open for a year. If she is unable to comprehend all the Xian formations on the star path before the deadline and enter the illusory god palace to ascend to the heavens, then she will have to wait for another 10,000 years. A few months have already passed and she is still trapped in those Xian formations. I just feel that her talent is not bad. It is a pity to wait so long. Who in the illusory god palace didn't wait like this? The first oracle let out a rare laugh as if he had heard a joke. Xuanhuan has already been stuck in the last few profound formations for 30,000 years, but I don't see you helping him. Jianyunlai could hear the dissatisfaction in the first oracle's words. But Xuanhuan was Xuanhuan after all, and Muyafeng was different. First divine envoy, ever since I took control of the star path, no one has successfully walked through the star path and entered the illusory shrine. This period of time was truly too long. Many mystic cultivators had already lost their confidence, and fewer people were even trying. If this continues, that's because they don't have the qualifications to enter the illusory god palace. Back then, didn't you successfully complete the star path and even become the 7th divine envoy? Jianyunlai looked troubled. But back then it was because Jianyunlai felt a chill in her heart when she sensed a cold gaze on her. She immediately swallowed the rest of her words. After a long while he said, This is Yunlai's fault. Yunlai will accept any punishment given by the first oracle. But there are some things that I have to say. Muyafeng is the most talented mystic cultivator in the illusory god palace in the past 10,000 years. If even she can't do it, then there's no need to talk about the others. If I have to choose to help someone ascend to the heavens and become a god, I will still choose her. You also understand the situation of the profound formations on the star path. The further you go, the more difficult it is. If you don't have enough talent and strength, even if someone gives you pointers, it's still useless. I admit that I helped Muyafeng, but she was able to succeed because of her own reasons. Besides, strictly speaking, I did give her some pointers, which may not even be as detailed as the annotations on the mythical flame diagram. If xuanhuan you can read the mythical flame diagram, why can't Muyafeng? In the beginning he actually didn't have this idea. On one hand, it was because he thought highly of Muyafeng and always felt that these problems weren't difficult for her. On the other hand, he didn't have such plans before. But as time passed, the development of the situation gradually deviated from his expectations. On Muyafeng's side, she was unable to crack the profound formation and was trapped in one place for a long time without any intention of continuing. On the other hand, Chu Luiyue continuously advanced with the help of the mythical flame diagram and successfully stepped into the area of the Grandmaster's profound formation. If this continued, Chu Luiyue might really surpass Muyafeng. That wasn't the result that Jianyunlai wanted to see. Because she didn't have a bloodline totem, Jianyunlai was biased against Chu Luiyue from the beginning and always felt that she would leave the illusory god palace soon. Who knew that not only did she not leave, but she also caused a lot of trouble and became the focus of the illusory god palace. If she really took the lead, not only would Muyafeng be unhappy, but Jianyunlai would also feel like she was slapped in the face. Even if Chu Luiyue couldn't ascend to the heavens and become a god, as long as she performed better than Muyafeng, it was inevitable that everyone would talk about her. And Jianyunlai, who was in charge of the star path, would naturally be implicated. What would happen in the end? Everyone would see that Muyafeng, who he had always thought highly of, was actually not that outstanding at all. Instead, it was Chu Luiyue who had been despised and ridiculed from the beginning, who easily crushed her in all aspects. Thinking of this scene, Jianyunlai felt that it was hard to accept. So when Muyafeng came to beg him, he thought about it again and agreed. And her performance did not disappoint him. He thought that everything would go smoothly, but who knew that this matter would alarm the first divine emissary? The first divine emissary listened quietly for a long time before asking, "Are you done?" Jianghu let out a long breath. "I'm done. It seems that you still think that you did nothing wrong." The first divine emissary's voice was faint with a trace of indifference. "Jianghu, I always thought that you were very smart, but now it seems that you are ridiculously stupid. Until now, can't you see that Zhen Bao Pavilion took the initiative to give the mythical flame diagram to Xuanhuan?" Jianghu was shocked and suddenly looked up. "What? Zhen Bao Pavilion giving it to Xuanhuan and you helping Mu Yafeng don't seem to be the same nature, right?" Chapter 23-21. Jianghu stood there in a daze for a long time. His mind was in a mess and his whole body was in a mess. Zhen Bao Pavilion took the initiative to give it to her? Didn't this mean that? He suddenly thought of something and sucked in a breath of cold air. A look of horror flashed across his eyes. First Oracle, only now did he realize what he had done wrong. Now he had no time to think about why Zhen Bao Pavilion did this. He only knew that this time if he was not careful, he would lose himself. "I'll go and take back the Shen formation diagrams that I gave to Mu Yafeng." The first Oracle suddenly asked. "You gave her the method to break all the Shen formations?" Jianghu swallowed his saliva with difficulty, but his throat was still tight. In the eyes of the first Oracle, this reaction naturally meant that he admitted it. "That's right. Since you've made up your mind to help, of course you have to help until the end." The first Oracle's voice was emotionless. This made Jianghu even more flustered. "Just as well. Open your eyes wide and take a good look. See if Mu Yafeng can ascend to the heavens and become a god with your help." Jianghu felt suffocated and uncomfortable. He wanted to defend himself but he couldn't say a word. Knock knock. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. "First Oracle, are you there?" This was Xu Jing's voice. She did not go to Herb Mountain today, so when she heard the commotion, she hurried over. She was the first to arrive. Jianghu was about to speak when he saw the phantom in front of him suddenly disappear. He wanted to ask her to stay but she had already disappeared. It was just the aura of the first Oracle. He could come and go as he pleased. He took a deep breath and rubbed his face hard. After being the seventh Oracle for so many years, he had always been cautious. This time he was impulsive and went easy on Mu Yafeng. He did not expect that he would be caught red-handed by the first Oracle. Although the first Oracle did not give him any substantial punishment, this made him even more nervous. He really could not understand what that person was thinking. Was he planning to come out of seclusion? If that was the case, there was nothing wrong with it. But the crux of the matter was, with so many things happening in the illusory god palace recently, why did that person target him? Helping Mu Yafeng cheat was neither a big deal nor a small matter. No matter what, it couldn't be more important than the lightning pond and Fengming Mountain, right? First Oracle? Xu Jing waited for a while, but he still didn't hear any movement inside, so he shouted again. Creak. The door was opened. Jianghu appeared behind the door. When Xu Jing saw him, he subconsciously looked inside. The first Oracle has already left. Jianghu said coldly. That person really came? Xu Jing looked shocked. He's willing to come out of seclusion? That's not right. Why is he looking for you the moment he comes out? Jianghu didn't want to talk too much with her, so she just said perfunctorily, the first divine emissary did not come personally. He only sent a wisp of his aura to ask me some questions. Xu Jing's expression softened a little, but he still felt quite surprised. What's the matter that actually alarmed the first Oracle? Jianghu glanced at her. You came here to ask about this? Then you can leave. After saying that, he closed the door again. Bang. Xu Jing didn't expect his actions to be so swift and straightforward. She was so shocked that she took half a step back. When she came back to her senses, she was immediately angry. Didn't she come to ask because she was too surprised that the first Oracle had come out of seclusion? What kind of attitude was this? If it weren't for the fact that Jianghu's status was slightly higher than hers, she would definitely not let it go so easily. Xu Jing tidied her clothes and turned to leave. After taking a few steps, she suddenly thought of something and turned back to look at the tightly shut door. Just now. Jianghu's expression was particularly ugly. Did something happen between him and the first Oracle? She thought for a moment and raised her voice. Seventh Oracle, I heard that Mu Yafeng has already cracked 6 great Grandmaster Shen formations in a row. Aren't you going to take a look? Bang. Jianghu suddenly smashed something. Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. What was wrong with him? Wasn't Mu Yafeng someone he particularly valued? Now that she had an outstanding performance, why was he still so angry? Xu Jing had a bad feeling. She gritted her teeth and finally turned to leave. After that, a few more oracles came to find out what was going on, but they were all sent away by Jin Yunlai with a few words. When Chu Luiwei and Rong Xiu left the illusory god palace and crossed the blue and black sea, she deliberately slowed down. Unfortunately, nothing out of the ordinary happened. After that, the two quickly rushed to the god-slaying mound. Because it wasn't their first time there, and because their strength had improved greatly, it only took them a short time to get there. At noon the next day, the two successfully arrived again. After passing through the forest, they officially entered the god-slaying mound. Looking from afar, it was vast and barren, bleak and cold. It was no different from before. It was just that the inexplicable coldness and pressure seemed to be stronger than before. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. Chu Luiwei frowned slightly. It had been a long time since they had been here, and the god-slaying mound seemed to have some subtle changes. They should already be inside. Rong Xiu looked into the distance and narrowed his eyes. Chu Luiwei nodded. Then the two walked forward hand in hand. At this time, deep in the god-slaying mound, Xianhuan was holding a long sword and staring at the two in front of him vigilantly. Behind him sat a young man covered in blood. It was Lu Feng. Zhou Long laughed. You want to enter here with just the two of you? Chapter 23-22. In front of them was a large area of broken tombstones. A desolate and sorrowful aura slowly spread out. This was the tomb of the honored god. Xianhuan and Lu Feng had been in the god-slaying mound for some time. They had spent a lot of time and effort to get here. They did not expect Zhou Long and Shi Yan to arrive at this time. As soon as they arrived, they ordered everyone to leave without hesitation. Most of the cultivators in the god-slaying mound had been forced to leave. Of course, not everyone was willing to do so. However, these two were too powerful. Even honored gods could not last more than 3 moves against them. Everyone had no choice but to obey. Zhou Long and Shi Yan had entered from the edge of the god-slaying mound, so they were the last to arrive here. They met Xianhuan and Lu Feng who were waiting outside the tomb. The aura of the tomb of the honored god had changed slightly with the passage of time. To ensure their safety, the two decided to wait here until the aura was at its weakest before going in. When Zhou Long and Shi Yan arrived, Xianhuan and Lu Feng had already waited here for 3 days. As expected, they were also chased away. But they did not agree. After a short stalemate, Zhou Long and Lu Feng attacked. After a few rounds, Lu Feng was injured and defeated. Xianhuan held his sword in front of Lu Feng to guard against Zhou Long's next move. Of course, Zhou Long didn't take his actions seriously at all. They were just two exalted gods. What was there to care about? Zhou Long looked down at the two of them. My patience is limited. I can't be bothered to continue arguing with you. I'll count to 3. If you don't leave by then, don't blame me for being merciless. Xianhuan said coldly. The god-slaying mound is not anyone's private territory. Every cultivator in the world comes here. You want everyone to leave? That's too unreasonable. 1. Zhou Long raised one finger. Obviously he did not care about Xianhuan and Lu Feng. He could not be bothered to continue arguing with them. After all, he had already given them the warning he needed. If they insisted on not listening, there was nothing he could do. Lu Feng coughed and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He twitched his lips without a smile. Xianhuan, there's no need to say so much to them. If they were reasonable, they would not do such a thing. Shi Yan glanced at the two of them and said slowly, that's right. Reason? Don't you know that in this world, strength is the only thing that matters? 2. Zhou Long raised her eyebrows. These two people were really not afraid of death. Unfortunately, perseverance without strength was ignorant stubbornness. Not only was it meaningless, it would even bring him a lot of trouble. The first messenger only said that the two of them were to come and find the last piece of music, but he did not say where it was. The god-slaying tomb was huge. Even if the two of them worked together, it would still take a lot of effort to find it. Because they were worried that someone would find the music score before them, the first thing they did when they arrived was to drive everyone out. Better to be safe than sorry. Although this would be troublesome, it would avoid some risks. Overall, it was worth it. Most of the people he had met before were quite obedient, or rather, sensible. After seeing that Zhou Long and Shi Yan's strength far exceeded theirs, they all gave up and retreated. Only these two were stubborn. 3. Zhou Long shouted the last count, shook his head and raised his hand. It's your honor to die in my hands. He did not want to dirty his hands with the blood of the exalted gods. Unfortunately, these two were not smart enough. Vigorous divine power quickly gathered in Jiulong's palm and transformed into a long sword. The long sword was bright and sharp, and it was covered with a thin layer of frost. Under the sunlight, it shone with a cold light. Then he raised the sword and slashed down. The sword fell silently, but wherever it passed, space was quickly cut open and then collapsed. Large swathes of black spatial cracks appeared, and violent energy surged out from them. Xianhuan gripped his sword even tighter. Just as he was about to attack, he realized that he could not move at all. The powerful aura suddenly descended, and he could not retaliate at all. Jiulong's sword fell from the sky and was about to kill Xianhuan and Lu Feng. A bloody wound suddenly appeared between Xianhuan's eyebrows. That was an extremely sharp sword energy, and it easily broke through his defense. Jiulong's eyes were indifferent. Die! That sword flew toward Xianhuan at an even faster speed. However, right at this moment, a sharp sound of air being torn apart suddenly came from afar. Swoosh! Then a bright golden and greenish-black sword light flew from the sky, piercing through the clouds and wind. Clang swoosh! That sword light and Jiulong's long sword collided, and then quickly flew up and slashed across. In an instant, sparks flew everywhere. Jiulong's sword was sent flying just like that. Seeing this, Jiulong was shocked and immediately raised his hand to call back his sword. The sword landed in his palm and was still trembling violently. It could be seen how powerful that blow was. He frowned and looked over. That was an extremely sharp long sword. Half golden, half greenish-black, neatly and perfectly blended together, and the glow was bright and heavy. This was, just as Jiulong and Xian were shocked, Xianhuan and Lu Feng had already sensed the extremely familiar aura on that sword. The two of them quickly looked at each other and saw the excitement in each other's eyes. Jiulong turned his head and looked in the direction where the sword came from. He shouted in a deep voice, "Who is it?" A clear and pleasant voice drifted over with the wind. "Ninth Divine Envoy, if you want to kill my people, you should at least ask for my permission first, right?" Jiulong was stunned at first, then he realized that this voice was very familiar. A name suddenly appeared in his mind. Xuanhuan. Just as he finished speaking, a woman in a red dress appeared in a flash. Her figure was slim and graceful, and her beauty was unparalleled. Her black hair flew in the wind, and the hem of her dress danced. There was a faint smile on her face, and her starry eyes were slightly curved like the moon, as if they were filled with starlight. Jiulong's face darkened. "It's really you." Xianhuan and Lu Feng could no longer suppress their emotions and shouted in unison. "Master!" Chu Luiwei came in front of the duo and sized them up. She only relaxed when she saw that their injuries weren't particularly serious. She smiled and said, "Don't worry. Fortunately, we're not too late." Jiulong frowned and stared at the few people in front of him. "The two of them are your subordinates." Chu Luiwei turned around and tucked her hair behind her ear. She raised her finger and the Star Spectre sword returned to her hand. She smiled. "Yes." Chapter 23:23. Jiulong looked at the woman in front of him in shock. He had only used 30% of his strength in that attack, but it wasn't something an ordinary cultivator could withstand. And yet, Chu Luiwei had blocked it so easily. He had heard this name a few times recently. After all, she had caused quite a commotion in the Illusion God Palace. But it wasn't until today that Jiulong realized that her strength was indeed far beyond that of an ordinary god. "You came out of the Heaven Gate?" Jiulong asked. Chu Luiwei smiled and nodded. "It's not the first time I've come out." "Ninth Divine Envoy, why are you so surprised?" Jiulong choked. He just felt that it was too ridiculous. Most of the cultivators in the Illusion God Palace would never step out of the Heaven Gate, let alone come to the world of Divine Ruins. And those who came from the world of Divine Ruins were proud to be able to enter the Illusion God Palace. They didn't want to leave. There were very few people like Chu Luiwei who kept going in and out of the house. Her frequency was even higher than that of the Divine Envoys. Wasn't the seventh Divine Envoy in charge of guarding the Heaven Gate? Why did they let her come out again and again? More importantly, she didn't have a bloodline totem. Wasn't that even more ridiculous? Jiulong stared at her vigilantly. "What are you doing here?" Even if she left the Illusion God Palace, there were many places she could go. Why did she choose the God-slaying tomb? It was related to the last Zither score, so Jiulong couldn't help but feel suspicious. Chu Luiwei blinked. "My two subordinates are here. What's so strange about me coming here?" "But the two Divine Envoys? Why did you suddenly leave the Illusion God Palace and come here and drive everyone else away? What are you doing?" Jiulong's expression was cold. That's not something you have the right to ask. Chu Liwei said, "Oh. It seems that the two divine envoys don't want to reveal. Then forget it." As she spoke, she raised her head towards Qi Han and Lu Feng behind her. "Let's go." She was about to go to the tombs. "Stop." Jiulong and Jiulong never thought that Chu Liwei would actually walk in without a second word. He didn't even put them in his eyes. Chu Liwei stopped in his tracks and turned his head to ask, "What's wrong? Is there anything else?" Jiulong gritted her teeth. "It seems like you've turned a deaf ear to what we've said before?" Chu Liwei asked. "Words? What words?" Jiulong felt stifled in his chest. Qi Han explained. "Master, they have already chased away all the cultivators here. If you hadn't come in time, I'm afraid we would have already." Chu Liwei raised his eyebrows. "Oh, about that?" She was wondering why she hadn't seen anyone along the way. It turned out that Jiulong and Shi Yan had chased them away. In that case, it was even more obvious what they wanted to do. Chu Liwei tilted his head and looked at Jiulong and Shi Yan. "That's really unfortunate. I've come this time because I have something important to do, so I won't be able to leave for the time being. I hope the two divine envoys will forgive me." Although she said so, her expression and tone were extremely natural. There wasn't the slightest hint of apology in them. Clearly she wasn't asking for help. She was just informing them of her choice and decision. She was going to stay here. Shi Yan frowned and said coldly, "Xuanhuan, you've done so many outrageous things in the Illusion God Palace. For Dumpling's sake, the divine envoys didn't pursue the matter. But that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. If you don't listen to our advice, don't blame us for being impolite." Chu Liyue's lips curved into a faint smile. "Forgive me for being blunt, but I don't think the divine envoys have done anything extra for me. Why do you look like you've given me a lot of things?" Shi Yan felt even more annoyed. In the Illusion God Palace, the divine envoys were revered. No matter what they said or did, their subordinates would do as they were told. Very few would object, and even fewer would dare to talk back to them. But now Chu Liwei had done all of this and she didn't seem afraid at all. Who gave her the confidence? "Xuanhuan, are you sure you want to continue being so impudent?" Jiulong raised his sword and pointed it at her. "No matter how powerful your eminence is, she's still your eminence." If he used his full strength, Chu Liwei wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. Chu Liwei blinked and smiled in the face of the cold sword light. "Divine envoys, if I'm not wrong, the two of you are also here for that last zither score, right? Since everyone has the same goal, why don't we work together and find it first? We can talk about the rest later." These words caused Jiulong and Shi Yan's expressions to change. This was something that the first divine messenger had specifically instructed the two of them. How did she know about it? Seeing the duo's reaction, Chu Liwei also found it interesting. She glanced at the two of them, then slowly asked, "You've come here to find the zither scores. The two of you have already come here to look for the zither score. Don't tell me that you still don't know. The two zither scores from before have already recognized me as their master?" "What did you say?" Jiulong and Shi Yan both exclaimed in shock. Chu Liwei shrugged. It seemed that they really didn't know. Since the first divine envoy gave you this task, why didn't he tell you about it? Not many people knew that she was the master of the zither scores, but Jianghu was one of them. He had chosen to tell the first divine envoy the location of the last score, so there was no reason for him not to tell her. Besides, someone like the first divine envoy should know this like the back of his hand. Otherwise, how could he be qualified to be called the first divine envoy and be in charge of the entire Illusion God Palace? But the strange thing was, these two didn't know? Jiulong was about to attack. Chu Liwei calmly raised her hand. "Wait. Ninth divine envoy, I've already said that the two zither scores are with me, and they already belong to me. If you kill me now, you won't get a single one." Once she died, the two zither scores would be scattered and hidden away again, and they would never be found again. Unless there was something wrong with their heads, Jiulong and Shi Yan would never touch her. This was also why Chu Liwei dared to be so frank. Since she couldn't hide it, she might as well be frank. "You dare threaten us?" Jiulong gritted her teeth. Chu Liwei sighed helplessly. "I've already made it so obvious, but you two only realized it now?" She had always been a straightforward person. If she wanted to threaten someone, she would do it openly and openly. The first two zither scores were with her. If they had the ability, they would have to fight for it. She wasn't afraid of death, but she didn't know if the Illusion God Palace would be afraid of getting nothing in the end. Chapter 23-24. Jiulong and Shi Yan never expected that Chu Liwei would do such a thing. She directly admitted that the two zither scores were with her and used them as leverage to threaten them so that they wouldn't dare to kill her. She was so direct that she didn't even give them any time to react. The most hateful thing was that after thinking about it carefully, they realized that Chu Luiyue wasn't so arrogant for no reason. After knowing this, even though they hated her to the core, they didn't dare to do anything to her. Since you're looking for the zither scores and I'm also looking for one, isn't it just right for us to work together? Chu Luiyue asked with a smile. Jiulong was fuming with anger. What do you mean by just right? Xuanhuan, do you really think we're fools? The zither scores had already recognized her as the master, so even if they found the remaining one, it would most likely end up in her hands. In this aspect, she had an absolute natural advantage. Even if they worked together and found the zither scores, it would just be a wedding dress for her. Right now they couldn't wait to guard against her, so why would they work together with her? Chu Luiyue looked regretful and spread her hands. It seems that the two of you aren't willing. Since that's the case then, let's mind our own business and rely on our own abilities. How about it? This zither score belongs to whoever finds it first. Jiulong and Xiyan looked at each other. Of course, they didn't want to agree to Chu Luiyue's suggestion. She was the master of the zither scores, so she had an advantage over them. But if they didn't agree, looking at her posture, it seemed like she was going to continue to cause trouble. And they couldn't do anything to her. After a long while, Xiyan gave Jiulong a look, then looked at Chu Luiyue. Since you insist, it's not that we can't agree. But we also have a condition. Divine Envoy, please speak. Whether or not we can find the zither scores will depend on our own abilities. However, the person who brings the zither scores back to the Illusion God Palace will be the real winner. At that time, no matter what the result is, the other side can't continue to fight for it. Chu Luiyue's red lips curved slightly. I knew these two people wouldn't be easy to convince. So this was what they were planning. One had to know that there was a considerable distance between here and the illusory God Palace. Who could predict what would happen in the middle? Even if she found it first, they could snatch it from her halfway and forcefully take it for themselves. In this way he would be able to achieve his goal. Chu Luiyue was a god, while Qi Han and Lu Feng, who stood behind him, were both high gods. Jiulong and Xiyan, on the other hand, were both at a level higher than her eminence. Wasn't this clearly bullying? Once they made a move, Chu Luiyue's side would not be able to compete with them even if they tried their best. This was clearly a robbery. However, after Chu Luiyue thought about it seriously for a while, he nodded happily and agreed. Sure. Chu Luiyue's reply was too sudden. Even Jiulong and the other two were momentarily stunned. However, one thing needs to be clear. Does returning to the illusory God Palace refer to passing through the gate of heaven or something else? If you insist that it only counts after entering the illusory God Palace, then wouldn't I have lost from the start? Chu Luiyue shrugged. Naturally, it counts after passing through the gate of heaven. Xiyan added. Although he didn't know why Chu Luiyue agreed, this condition was clearly beneficial to them. It would be a waste not to use it. It would be best if the two of them could directly find the last zither score. If Chu Luiyue was one step ahead of them, they could just snatch it back. As long as they didn't harm her life, everything else was still under their control. Jiulong's mood finally calmed down. Since we've discussed it then, rumble. A loud sound suddenly came from afar. Jiulong and Xiyan immediately turned to look. This sound came from the depths of the tomb. Someone had already entered. The two looked at each other. Jiulong immediately realized something and looked at Chu Luiyue angrily. You secretly brought someone here? Chu Luiyue smiled and her eyes curved into crescents. I didn't say that I came here alone. You. Jiulong was so angry that her teeth were itching. She had said so much just to stall for time. Xiyan frowned. Forget it, now is not the time to argue with her. Let's go in and see what's going on. This commotion came so suddenly that it was definitely not something an ordinary cultivator could do. Something must have happened in the tombs of her eminence. Perhaps, it has something to do with the last zither score. Jiulong glared at Chu Luiyue. Xuanhuan, it's too early for you to be happy. The one who has the last laugh is the winner. Chu Luiyue couldn't be bothered with the two of them. She turned to Qi Han and Lu Feng. Let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, and her slender figure quickly disappeared from the spot. She went straight into the depths of the tomb. Qi Han and Lu Feng followed closely behind her. Fortunately, the two of them weren't seriously injured. Moreover, Chu Luiyue and Jiulong had been fighting for a while, so they had rested enough and quickly followed. Jiulong cursed under her breath and followed Xiyan. Jiulong and Xiyan's cultivation level was higher than Chu Luiyue's after all. In just a few breaths' time they had overtaken them. The two of them didn't stop and went straight in the direction of the voice. After about 15 minutes they saw a figure in the distance. It was a young man. At this moment his back was facing them. His clothes were whiter than snow and he was tall and straight. He had one hand behind his back. The space in front of him was already beginning to distort and collapse, and it was constantly devouring the energy around him. Even though it was only a back view, that cold and noble aura was still not concealed in the slightest. Jiulong frowned. Is this the person who came with Xuanhuan? Why does it look like something is wrong? He couldn't tell what was wrong, but there was an inexplicable sense of uneasiness in his heart. However, he quickly threw this feeling to the back of his mind. Who are you? How dare you team up with Xuanhuan and deceive the two of us? Jiulong asked in a low voice. Hearing her voice, the man turned around. His handsome and devilish face seemed to be covered with a thin layer of frost. His phoenix eyes were deep and unparalleled. Jiulong Xian, you're getting bolder. Digression. I want to eat barbecue. I'm going to be a fan. 6:00 p.m. Chapter 23-25. This question instantly caused Jiulong and Xian to be shocked on the spot. Emperor? The two of them were shocked. Their previous arrogance immediately disappeared and was replaced by deep respect. Why are you here? Jiulong's face turned pale. What did he say to the emperor just now? No wonder he felt that something was wrong when he saw this figure. This aura. He actually didn't recognize it. Actually, Jiulong couldn't be blamed. After so many years, the number of times he had seen the emperor could be counted on one hand. On one hand, the emperor didn't show up most of the time. On the other hand, with his and Xian's seniority, they were usually quite far away from each other. They couldn't be said to be familiar with each other. Moreover, they didn't expect that the emperor would appear here. Rongxiu looked up slightly. Three figures could be vaguely seen from afar. They were Chu Luiyue and the other two. Their strength was not as strong as Jiulong and Xian. In addition, Qihan and Lu Feng were only in the high god realm and were injured, so their speed was even more limited. As a result, the distance between the two sides was so large in a short period of time. However, this made it convenient for Rongxiu. This short period of time was enough for him to solve the problem of the two. Thinking of this, Rongxiu retracted his gaze and looked at the two again. Feeling that indifferent and cold gaze on them, Jiulong and Xian felt a sense of pressure and their bodies tensed up. Didn't you already guess why I am here? He said indifferently. The two of them were stunned. After a while they suddenly came to their senses and were shocked. Wait, what does the emperor mean? Did he really come with Chu Luiyue? But Chu Luiyue's background? When did he have contact with the emperor? Furthermore, it would appear that the relationship between them was not ordinary at all. Otherwise, Chu Luiyue wouldn't have used such a tone when he mentioned the emperor. Xian suddenly thought of something and gasped. Emperor, that Xuanhuan is one of your men? He was guessing that Chu Luiyue was Rongxiu's subordinate and nothing else. However, Rongxiu was too lazy to correct him. He only raised his eyebrows slightly. His people? There was nothing wrong with that. Ben was his. His reaction in the eyes of the other two was obviously a tacit agreement. For a moment, the two of them did not know how to react. Why didn't Chu Luiyue mention such an important matter before? If she had revealed even the slightest bit, she definitely wouldn't have received that kind of treatment in the illusory god palace. Jiulong and Xian couldn't figure it out. The only thing they were clear on was that they had offended Chu Luiyue earlier, and this undoubtedly meant that they had offended the Celestial Emperor as well. Celestial Emperor, we have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai, which is why we offended you. Please forgive us. Jiulong came back to his senses and quickly begged for mercy. Other than begging for mercy, he couldn't think of anything else he could do now. Previously, he had rushed over excitedly, intending to find the last zither score before Chu Luiyue. Even if he couldn't find it, it wasn't bad to get rid of the person who conspired with her first. Who knew that he would bump into this person? Wasn't this courting death? Xian saw the situation and immediately followed suit, his heart filled with uneasiness. Although they had only seen the Celestial Emperor a few times, they were very clear about the Celestial Emperor's temperament. It was definitely not to be provoked. The mistake that they had made today was enough for them to suffer a lot. Rongxiu didn't say anything. The surroundings fell into a dead silence, as if even the air had frozen at this moment. The two of them held their breaths as if their hearts were about to jump out of their throats. Finally Rongxiu spoke. Go to the illusory god sea and receive your punishment. Without Ai's permission you are not allowed to leave. Hearing this, Jiu Long and Shi Yan were stunned. Celestial Emperor means, now? Rong Xiu's eyes moved slightly, and his thin scarlet lips raised into an extremely cold arc. If you can continue to stay here, it will be considered as your ability. The two of them trembled at the same time. This meant that if they didn't leave immediately, the Celestial Emperor would personally take action. Even if the two of them had the guts, they wouldn't dare to take such a risk. Wasn't this taking the initiative to throw themselves into a knife's mouth? But, Celestial Emperor, it's not that the two of us deliberately disobeyed your orders, but this time, we are here on the orders of the first divine envoy to find the last zither score. If we can't complete the mission, I'm afraid that when we return, we won't be able to explain it to the first divine envoy. Jiu Long braced himself and spoke with difficulty. If they had any other choice, they wouldn't choose to go against the Celestial Emperor. But in this situation they really had no choice. After all, the divine envoys were from the illusory god palace. Since the first divine envoy had ordered them, they didn't dare to disobey. Although the Celestial Emperor had a noble status, under most circumstances, he wouldn't interfere in the matters of the illusory god palace. And the zither score was also an item of the illusory god palace. Logically speaking, this matter shouldn't have much to do with the Celestial Emperor. Why would he come here personally? Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. What I's orders can't even compare to the words of the first divine envoy. We don't dare. Jiu Long and Shi Yan's souls almost flew out of their bodies as they hurriedly denied. Not to mention them, even the master of the illusory god palace had to respectfully greet the Celestial Emperor when he saw him. How could they dare to say that? After weighing the pros and cons, the two of them struggled for a while before finally nodding with difficulty. We obey the Celestial Emperor's orders. But the last zither score, Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes. The zither score came from the illusory god palace, so it should return in the end. Hearing this, Jiu Long and Shi Yan only thought that he agreed to return the last zither score to the illusory god palace after finding it. No matter what, they would be able to answer to the first divine envoy when they returned. Then, the two of us will take our leave. After saying that, seeing that Rong Xiu's expression was normal, the two of them bowed respectfully and then hurriedly turned and left. Their speed was even faster than when they came. They were afraid that if they were a step late, they would lose their lives here. After a while, the two figures quickly disappeared into the distance. At this moment, Chu Luiyue and the other two finally arrived. Seeing that only Rong Xiu was here, Chu Luiyue was stunned. Where are the two divine envoys? Chapter 23-26. Rong Xiu turned around. Who? Chu Luiyue said, the 9th and 10th divine messengers. The two of them just came here. Didn't you see them? Rong Xiu shook his head. I've been here the whole time. I didn't see anyone coming. Chu Luiyue frowned. How could she not see them? Although the two divine messengers had put some distance between her and Seven Childu Wind, she was sure that they were coming this way. She looked left and right. The surroundings were barren and desolate. There were no signs of anyone coming here. Suddenly, she focused her gaze and looked at the collapsing void not far behind Rong Xiu. This is... Rong Xiu followed her gaze and explained. The loud noise just now came from here. The last time we came here, something similar happened, but it was different. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly. She had noticed this as well. The last time, she and Rong Xiu fell into a space that suddenly collapsed, and they brought the rocks back. This time, the energy and pressure here were much stronger than in the tombs of the high gods. Although the void was constantly swallowing energy, twisting and collapsing, it was not completely overturned yet. From this, one could see how powerful the power of space here was. At a glance, a transparent vortex had formed in the void. It kept spinning and expanding. The surrounding energy of heaven and earth kept surging into it, gradually turning it into a black hole. It could not be seen or touched. Only the vast pressure was getting heavier and heavier, indicating the danger within. It was still rising. A faintly discernible summoning force came from the vortex. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly and walked forward. Master. Qi Han and Lu Feng called out worriedly. Chu Luiyue raised her hand. Don't worry. I know what to do. With that, she continued to walk forward. At this moment, a piece of gravel the size of a palm suddenly rolled over from the side. It only stopped when it touched the tip of her foot. Chu Luiyue looked down. Obviously, this stone came from one of the tombstones. And it was the tomb of the high god. She bent down and picked up the stone. Suddenly, she heard a faint buzzing sound in front of her that could not be ignored. Buzz? She looked up in surprise, only to see that the vortex not far in front of her had suddenly stopped spinning. But this situation only lasted for a moment. The next moment, everything returned to normal. It didn't seem any different from before. However, Chu Liyue's eyes widened in shock. Because there seemed to be an invisible connection between her and the vortex. This feeling was very strange. From this moment on, she could vaguely feel the changes in energy of the vortex. She was stunned for a moment, then suddenly she looked at the stone in her hand. It was just a shattered, weathered and ordinary-looking rock. There were traces of erosion on it. If it was on the ground, no one would take a second look at it. However, this was a tombstone that belonged to a high god. At this moment, the void to her right twisted and collapsed, then quickly formed a vortex. Another stone rolled to her feet. Chu Liyue sucked in a breath of cold air. An absurd and daring idea surfaced in her mind. "It can't be," she muttered softly. Then she bent down and picked up the second stone. Almost at the same time, the second vortex stopped spinning. Chu Liyue's hand slowly clenched. Then, the vortex spun again and it established that invisible connection with Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue was shocked. As expected. The stones here were similar to the ones she had obtained in the high god's tombstones, but in fact, they were very different. Each of them actually controlled a space. It might be an exaggeration to say that they controlled it, but it was basically the same. The surrounding energy was constantly surging toward the two vortexes, and the two stones in Chu Liyue's hands seemed to be faintly strengthening. Although it was subtle, it could not be mistaken. Clang. Suddenly, the sound of a zither came from Chu Liyue's dantian. The sound of the zither was bleak and cold, and it spread far and wide in this vast wilderness. Chu Liyue frowned subconsciously. She did not do anything just now, so why did the sound of the zither suddenly appear? Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from the wind. "The void over there is also starting to collapse." And there. Chu Liyue followed his gaze. Not far behind them, 3 more vortexes quickly appeared. The vast space seemed to be divided into countless small areas, and they all started to collapse. In just a few minutes, Chu Liyue and the others were already surrounded by several void vortexes. A few stones rolled over and stopped at Chu Liyue's feet. Her heart raced and the blood in her body seemed to be boiling. Her guess seemed to be correct. These stones, these tombstones of her eminence, these heroic souls that had been buried for tens of thousands of years, seemed to be awakening. Her eminence was naturally different from a high god. A high god's combat strength was in the god domain, but her eminence had completely divided this world and controlled the endless power of space. Bus. Void vortexes appeared around them one after another. More and more stones came to Chu Liyue's side, as if they were responding to her summons. Clang. Chu Liyue's glabella was boiling hot. Chapter 23-27. She touched the area between her eyebrows. It was as if there was a burning flame burning there. Her heart was beating rapidly, and the blood in her body was surging. This was her totem? Chu Liyue had known about the existence of this thing for a long time, but it had only appeared a few times when she was in a life-or-death situation. Hence, she had not been able to pay much attention to it. But now this totem had suddenly appeared again. It was so clear. The surrounding energy of heaven and earth started to gather towards her quickly. Her aura also started to rise rapidly. Bus. Chu Liyue looked up. Above the heavens, the void was continuously distorting and collapsing. Vortexes were constantly appearing. Large pieces of rocks had already piled up beside her feet. An unparalleled amount of energy exploded, creating an extremely terrifying pressure that made it hard for people to breathe. Beside her, Lu Feng clutched her chest and sat down. She coughed a few times and wiped away the blood at the corner of her mouth. Then she placed her hands on her knees and started to channel the surrounding energy into her body. Under such a powerful pressure, the best way to deal with it was to cultivate. Seeing this, Qihan's expression became serious. He also placed his sword in front of him and started to cultivate. At this moment, endless energy was surging towards them from all directions. Most of it entered the collapsed void, which indirectly strengthened the power of the rocks beside Chu Liyue's feet. The remaining small portion dissipated and was swallowed by Lu Feng and Qihan. Although the energy that the two of them occupied was only a small portion compared to the energy that was surging into the void, it was definitely an extremely vast amount for an exalted god. A faint blue glow overflowed from Lu Feng's body and quickly enveloped him. This was his godly territory. After the violent energy entered this godly territory, it was refined and became even purer. Without a doubt, this greatly increased Lu Feng's cultivation speed. Xianhuan, who was beside her, made the same choice almost at the same time. A faint silver glow silently spread out and enveloped Xianhuan's body. Rong Xiu's gaze turned slightly and paused on the two of them for a moment. His eyes were deep, yet calm and indifferent. In the next moment he looked away. In fact, if there were other cultivators present, they would definitely be shocked to see Lu Feng and Xianhuan's situation. After all, the two of them were only high gods. Logically speaking, their god realms should not be able to resist the terrifying might of the venerable god around them. It was even to the extent that the deity domain could not be used under such circumstances. However, from the beginning to the end, the movements of these two people were extremely smooth and natural, as if they were not hindered in the slightest. If Chu Luiyue turned around to take a look, she might have sensed that something was wrong. However, all her energy was focused on the collapsing void and the gathering stones. How could she care about anything else? One after another. As more and more stones approached her, the invisible connection between her and the void vortexes around her became closer and closer. At the same time, a sense of desolation and sorrow welled up in his heart. Chu Luiyue was never a sentimental person. However, as she stood here, as time slowly passed and everything around her kept changing, her state of mind seemed to be moving along uncontrollably. A wind blew, carrying the coarse gravel of the desolate wilderness. When it brushed past her face, it brought a slight stinging pain. The smell of blood in the air seemed to have thickened. The solemn and bleak sound of the zither rang out from her body and spread far and wide. There seemed to be an image that appeared in her mind, but it was not very clear. Chu Luiyue raised her hand almost instinctively. Her eyes focused and seemed to have sunk into nothingness. At this moment, there seemed to be countless stars in the depths of her obsidian-like eyes. Then her slender and white fingertips gently plucked. Clang. There were no strings under her hands, so she used the countless intersecting spaces as support to play the zither. Clang clang. Shattered tombstones stood in great numbers on the wilderness. There seemed to be a zither sound in the depths that resonated with her from afar. The palace of the illusory god. Jiulong and Shi Yin returned as fast as they could. After stepping into the illusory god palace, they did not care about anything else and hurried to the residence of the first divine envoy. Just as they arrived outside the courtyard and stood still, the door of the courtyard opened. Seeing this scene, Jiulong and Shi Yin looked at each other and saw the worry and nervousness in each other's eyes. The first divine envoy obviously knew something. This made them timid and for a moment, they did not dare to take a step forward. Come in and talk. A low and indifferent voice came from inside. The two did not dare to refuse and walked in nervously. Just like last time, they stopped when they were 5 steps away from the door. After respectfully cupping their fists, Jiulong spoke after some deliberation. First divine envoy, this time, the two of us did not do well and did not succeed in bringing back the zither score. Please punish us. Reason? The voice was calm and collected, without the slightest hint of surprise. This? Jiulong wiped the sweat from her forehead. However, Shi Yin could not help but explain. First divine envoy, this time we failed to return because the emperor also went to the god-slaying tomb. Also Xianghai went with him. Maybe because Xianghai was the owner of the first 2 zither scores, the emperor intended to let her do it. Although we don't know why the emperor suddenly intervened, we did not dare to disobey the emperor's order, so we came back. However, the emperor promised to send the zither score to the illusory god palace after this matter is over. Jiulong gritted her teeth and added. In addition, the two of us have been ordered to the illusory god sea to receive punishment because we offended the emperor unintentionally. Without the emperor's order, we are not allowed to go out. In other words, after explaining to the first divine envoy, the two of them had to go to the illusory god sea. After the two of them finished speaking, the room was silent for a long time. This strange silence caused the two of them to be somewhat at a loss. Just now they did not say anything wrong, did they? No matter what, they had explained the matter clearly. If one thought about it, one would understand that this matter was not their fault. Not to mention them, even the first divine envoy did not dare to disobey the emperor's order. Moreover, the emperor had already punished them. What else could be considered enough? Jiulong and Shi Yin waited for a long time. First divine envoy? Finally, they got a response. I already know about this matter. You can leave now. You should receive your punishment, but this matter cannot be spread. The two of them were stunned. You mean, the emperor went to the god-slaying tomb? The voice paused. Everything and everyone related to the zither score must be kept secret. Chapter 23-28. This was the highest secret of the Illusion God Palace, so it was normal for the first divine envoy to ask them to keep it a secret. Without any hesitation, the two of them immediately agreed. Yes. If the other divine envoys ask, just say that you didn't manage to find the score and offended the emperor, so you were sent to the Illusion God Ocean. There's no need to mention anything else. Jiulong paused. He could guess what the first divine envoy meant, but he wasn't sure. After a moment of hesitation, he finally asked. First divine envoy then. Xuanhuan is the emperor's woman? Don't you understand the emperor's attitude? The first divine envoy interrupted him with a cold and indifferent voice. Jiulong was shocked and hurriedly said. Yes, Jiulong understands. Xiyan understands. That woman had been in the Illusion God Palace for so long, but she hadn't revealed anything. The emperor's intentions were clear. The only thing that wasn't right was probably the extra attention and care that Zhenbao Pavilion had given her. But that matter didn't arouse too many people's suspicions. After all, Chu Luiyue was a mystic master and had great talent and strength. Even if she didn't have any background, it was normal for Precious Treasure Pavilion to be willing to support her. Jiulong and Xiyan had heard about this before, but they didn't take it to heart. But now that they thought about it, they realized that there was a reason for everything. It was just that if this reason were to be revealed, who knew how many jaws would drop from shock. The two even secretly rejoiced that they hadn't interacted much with Chu Luiyue. Other than the dispute over the score in the god-slaying tomb, they hadn't offended her much. Judging from the emperor's attitude, it was clear that he valued her greatly. It wouldn't be good to provoke her. You may leave. Hearing this, the two heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly left. After they left, the gate of the courtyard was tightly shut. In the courtyard, little Hachi was lazily resting on a chair, holding a scarlet pill in her hand. She narrowed her eyes and looked at it through the light. Jian Fengqi sat next to her with his hands on his knees. A rare hint of nervousness appeared in his charming peach blossom eyes. Did you refine this yesterday? Little Hachi asked. Jian Fengqi nodded. A total of 6 pills. They're all here. There was a jade bottle beside little Hachi. The one in her hand was the first one she had poured out. The veins on it were clear and the medicinal fragrance was rich. This was a top-notch Grand Physician level pill. Then, with a light pinch of her fingernails, the pill instantly turned into ashes. Little Hachi. Jian Fengqi's eyes widened instantly. Why did you destroy my pill? Little Hachi blinked. Didn't you ask me to help you refine the pills? This is my answer, there is no need to keep this pill. Go back and continue to work hard. Jian Fengqi's eyes twitched. It took an entire day. You managed to refine a pill of this standard in just one day? As a Grand Physician, aren't you a little too weak? Little Hachi's words successfully blocked Jian Fengqi's remaining words. Then little Hachi picked up the jade bottle beside her. With a squeeze of her palm, the jade bottle, along with the pills inside, was instantly turned into ashes. Jian Fengqi suddenly stood up, his handsome features distorted for a moment. With just these you'll never be able to break through to Grand Physician level in this lifetime. Little Hachi clapped her hands, took out a snow-white handkerchief, and carefully wiped her hands clean. Jian Fengqi clutched his chest and took a step back. He pointed a trembling finger at little Hachi, but he couldn't say anything. He was angry. He thought that he had suffered enough during this period of time, but he underestimated little Hachi's fighting ability. Last time he stole a medical book from little Hachi. Although he didn't say it out loud, he was still very grateful to little Hachi. So after he finished refining this time, he specially came to ask little Hachi for help. But what awaited him was an absolutely merciless attack from all sides. Jian Fengqi regretted it for a moment. When he first got the medical book, why did he think that little Hachi was a good person? He was really blind, really blind. Little 8 was finally satisfied when he saw him being angered to this extent. Actually, she wasn't so sharp-tongued in the first place and she wasn't deliberately targeting Jian Fengqi. It was just that she had suffered too much from Big Brother recently, and needed to find someone to calm down. Seeing Jian Fengqi suffer, little Hachi immediately felt much better. That's right. She was still very outstanding. In fact, Big Brother was still the pervert. Yes, that was it. Thinking of this, little Hachi narrowed her beautiful eyes and said with a smile, "Seeing that you've worked hard to refine these pills, I'll say one more thing. There are 2 medicinal herbs in here, you've used the wrong ones." Of course I know what's wrong with these pills. Jian Fengqi snorted. Little Hachi was stunned and sat up. Really? Jian Fengqi pursed his lips. Isn't it just raging winter grass and river wood? Originally we should use Wind Thousand Seeds and Devil's Snare to replace them. Little Hachi raised her eyebrows and looked him up and down. Oh, I couldn't tell. You really know? Jian Fengqi didn't say anything. He was still distressed over the bottle of pills that Little Hachi had just crushed. However, Little Eight didn't mind and asked again. Since you know, why don't you change it? If these two medicinal herbs are used well, the level of this pill can be raised from senior doctor to senior doctor. Jian Fengqi did have some skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to compete with Chu Luiyue for so many years and still be just a hair's breadth away. This in itself was enough to show that he actually had extraordinary talent. Many times, a tyrannical opponent could often stimulate a person's potential to the greatest extent. Jian Fengqi was like this. Although he had been defeated repeatedly over the years, he had unknowingly left countless people far behind. Hearing Little Hachi's question, Jian Fengqi sighed. You think I don't want to do this? But Herb Mountain doesn't have those two medicinal herbs. How is that possible? Little Hachi's face was full of astonishment. Although these two medicinal herbs were precious, they couldn't be considered top-grade rare items. Moreover, what didn't Herb Mountain have? I've asked. They did have them before, but the last batch was harvested decades ago. Although there are new ones, they're not old enough. These two medicinal herbs required at least 100 years of age. He had no choice but to give up. Little Hachi blinked and then stood up. Impossible. Herb Mountain has always been guarded by the 8th Oracle. How could she make such a low-level mistake? No matter what kind of heavenly treasure, when harvesting it, must not be completely seized. Instead, the foundation must be left behind. Little Hachi's heart suddenly burned with a ball of fire. Is she crazy? Chapter 23-29. The corner of Jian Fengqi's eyes twitched as he held his forehead helplessly. This person's temper was still as bad as before. In the entire illusory god palace, there were probably only a few people who dared to scold a divine envoy like this. He waved his hand and motioned for Little Hachi to sit down and restrain herself. Little Hachi, lower your voice. Are you afraid that others can't hear you? Although this was their own courtyard, it couldn't stop the walls from having ears. If someone heard it and reported it to the 8th divine envoy, then, Little Hachi's brows furrowed. Did I say something wrong? Herb Mountain is such a large territory and there are many kinds of herbs. How could someone have picked them all? And more than one kind. She's a divine envoy, isn't she too ridiculous? Xu Jing had always considered himself as the manager of Herb Mountain, and now it turned out like this? Seeing her huge reaction, Jian Fengqi's heart instantly felt touched. Little Hachi, I didn't expect you to be so concerned about my alchemy. Little Hachi glanced at him. Brother, don't misunderstand. I'm just worried about those herbs. Jian Fengqi. Pretend I didn't say anything. Little Hachi crossed her arms and paced back and forth in the courtyard in annoyance. She really couldn't figure out what Xu Jing was doing. The key was that in the past few years she had imposed various restrictions on entering and leaving Herb Mountain. With just this, how could things turn out like this? Little Hachi struggled for a while and finally couldn't help but walk out. Jian Fengqi hurriedly asked, Hey, where are you going? Little Hachi was angry. To Herb Mountain. I want to see if she deliberately hid the herbs or if she really let someone use them all. Jian Fengqi was stunned. Strange, when did Little Hachi become so angry? He wasn't angry himself, so why was she so angry? Seeing that Little Hachi was really going out, he hurriedly stood up to stop her. Little Hachi, I think we should just forget about it. Is she the 8th Oracle? If he really let her go there so excitedly, she would definitely cause trouble. Little Hachi raised her eyebrows. What? You don't dare to go? Jian Fengqi was speechless. Was this a question of whether he dared or not? At this moment, Xijing also walked out of the house and headed outside. Seeing the two of them standing at the door, he greeted them. Yo, Little Hachi, are you going to Herb Mountain again? Little Hachi nodded. That's right. How did 4th brother know? Yoshii suddenly paused and staggered. He quickly supported himself on the door and coughed. Ahem, I heard you guys talking about this just now. Does 4th brother also support me going? Little Hachi pouted and asked pitifully, 4th brother, you have no idea what Xu Jing has done to Herb Mountain. Shijingo glared at him and immediately patted his chest. Go. In this illusion god palace, where can't Little Hachi go? Don't worry, with 4th brother here, no one will bully you. When 4th brother is done, I'll go find you. 4th brother is still going to the lightning pool? That's right. Xijing nodded. I think they don't plan on unsealing it yet. I really don't know how long they'll drag it out. His tone was filled with dissatisfaction. He had been going there almost every day recently and little Hachi was already used to it. She nodded in agreement. It's a bit too much. Fourth brother, you go first. I can handle my own matters. Don't worry. Jian Fengqi, who was standing at the side, was confused. These two. What were they talking about? Why did it sound like those oracles really couldn't do a good job and they were very dissatisfied with it? Chu Liwei was used to being arrogant. Why were the 13 Yu guards learning from him? They didn't even have a bloodline totem, but each of them was more arrogant than the other? Lightning Pool, Herb Mountain. Why did it sound like it was her territory? Mitsui responded and gave her a thumbs up, praising her. Thank you for your help. Little Hachi, you're so beautiful today. 81st smiled, then asked, what's the matter? You weren't beautiful yesterday? Mitsui immediately said with great sincerity, Little Hachi is beautiful every day. The second most beautiful woman in the world. The number one beauty was their master. This was the tacit agreement of the 13 Yu guards. Hearing this, little 8 was indeed satisfied, and only then did he wave his little hand. Then fourth brother, goodbye. Only then did Shijing leave. After taking a few steps, Shijing lightly slapped his own mouth. Who told you to be so talkative? Who told you to be so talkative? Actually, when he was in the room, he had been thinking about the lightning pool. He didn't hear a single word of what little Hachi and Jian Fengqi said outside. When he was about to leave, he coincidentally bumped into them and a sentence came out just like that. Luckily, he managed to cover it up. Shijing took a deep breath, then quickened his pace and walked forward. With Shijing's support, little Hachi immediately became more confident and went straight to Herb Mountain. Jian Fengqi saw that he couldn't persuade her, so he could only follow her. Little Hachi looked back at him and teased. Why, aren't you worried that you'll cause a lot of trouble if you go with me? Jian Fengqi said seriously. No matter what, this matter started because of me. I can't just sit back and do nothing. Little Hachi was interested and asked. Then if I fight with Xu Jing? Jian Fengqi said without hesitation. I'll cheer for you. Little Hachi, she knew that she couldn't rely on this brother of hers. The two of them were very fast. Herb Mountain was the same as usual. People came and went and it was very lively. When they saw little Hachi coming over, many burning gazes fell on her. At the same time, some of them glanced at Jian Fengqi with hostility. Jian Fengqi was silent for a moment. Little Hachi, I'm a little regretful. Can I go back now? Little Hachi walked forward without looking back. What are you afraid of? Let them look. It's not like you'll lose a piece of meat. Jian Fengqi. You won't, but I might. It wasn't that he hadn't been looked at by so many people at the same time, but they were usually women. It was the first time that so many men were staring at him at the same time. Young Master Jian was really panicking. Little Hachi laughed. I see that many girls are looking at you too. Jian Fengqi's looks were top-notch and he was suave and elegant. It was normal for girls to like him. Swish. Jian Fengqi pushed open his fan and covered half of his face as he softly said, I'm sorry. Don't talk nonsense. It's not good if others hear you. Little Hachi understood. I'm afraid that little Hongyu will hear me. But she's been cultivating in seclusion in her room recently. Jian Fengqi's eyebrows twitched. How do you know that she won't suddenly appear here? This was what she was best at, all right? He was busy defending himself and didn't deny the first half of the sentence. Little Hachi pursed her lips and smiled meaningfully. Forget it. Let's go see if there are any more of those two herbs. After saying that, she ran in a certain direction. Jian Fengqi said, wait, it's not there. He had been here before and was clearly in the opposite direction. Little Hachi blinked. It's here. Digression, 13 Yu guards, gradually recovering lost territory 6:00 p.m. Chapter 23:30. Jian Fengqi pointed in another direction. Wind thousand seeds and devil's snare are usually associated with each other. They grow in damp and cold places. I've been to this herb mountain a few times. I'm sure I'm not mistaken. Little Hachi said, I didn't say you were mistaken. But didn't you say that there's none over there? Let's go somewhere else. Who knows? Jian Fengqi said helplessly, I've already asked around the entire herb mountain. There's only one place that has it. It's over there. It's not found anywhere else. Little Hachi suddenly became stubborn. But how will we know if we don't go? Jian Fengqi couldn't argue with her, so he had to say, all right then. Let's go over there and take a look. Little Hachi nodded and headed in a certain direction without hesitation. Jian Fengqi frowned slightly. Looking at little Hachi's back, a strange feeling welled up in his heart. Why did he feel that little Hachi didn't just pick a random direction? Instead, she had already made up her mind to go there? This thought flashed through Jian Fengqi's mind, but he quickly suppressed it. He moved his feet and followed her. The herb mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. The area was vast and the mountain range was continuous. There were all kinds of heavenly materials and earthly treasures. It was easy to get lost in this place if one wasn't careful. But little Hachi seemed to be very familiar with this place. She turned left and right without stopping. After walking for a while, Jian Fengqi finally couldn't help but ask, "Little Hachi, how many times have you been here before? Why are you so familiar with this place?" Little Hachi thought for a moment and said, "Not many times. But the terrain here is simple. I can remember it with a glance. What's so strange about it?" Jian Fengqi, looking at little Hachi's relaxed expression for a moment, he doubted his brain. Was it not enough? That couldn't be right. He was a celestial physician. With so many complicated prescriptions, he could basically memorize them after reading them a few times. His memory could definitely be considered top-notch. However, after coming to Herb Mountain several times, he often felt a little confused. What was going on with little Hachi? After thinking for a while, Jian Fengqi felt that there was only one possibility. Little Hachi's talent was indeed a little better than his. No matter what, she was now a supreme doctor. It was not surprising that she was better than him in this aspect. Thinking of this, Jian Fengqi felt much better. "We're here." It was right in front. Little Hachi suddenly said. Jian Fengqi followed her line of sight and saw that behind a steep and tall mountain, there was actually a rather short and ordinary hill. The mountain was verdant and lush, and there were many medicinal herbs growing there. However, when Jian Fengqi took a closer look, he did not see feng qianzi and mandala. "This place doesn't have it, right?" he said with some uncertainty. Little Hachi did not say anything. In a flash, she arrived at the foot of the hill. A small stream flowed by. The water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. On both sides of the stream, there were clusters of lush green bellflowers that were half the height of a person. Little Hachi's body was light as she jumped over a few stones in the stream. After arriving at the other side, she stretched out her hand and brushed aside a cluster of bellflowers. "Look, isn't this it?" Hearing this, Jian Fengqi was stunned and hurried over. He went over to take a look. Indeed, there were clusters of feng qianzi growing under the bellflowers. These feng qianzi had no leaves. On the rhizome, there were round and round seeds in a picturesque disorder. When the wind blew, this heavy cluster of seeds swayed with the wind. A few of the seeds were blown off and scattered in the stream flowing downstream. Because these feng qianzi were a light green, they were hidden very well among the bellflowers. Therefore Jian Fengqi did not see them at first. At the rhizome of the feng qianzi, there were thin purple vines wrapped around it. It was mandala. They really do have them? Jian Fengqi was really shocked. More importantly, these feng qianzi and mandala seemed to be at least 500 years old. However, he had asked many people before, and they all said that Herb Mountain did not have any more feng qianzi and mandala of this age. What are you waiting for? Little Hachi raised her chin, indicating that he could take the things away. Jian Fengqi came back to his senses and took a few clusters. Looking at the herbs in his hand, Jian Fengqi could not help but look at little Hachi again with a strange expression. "Little Hachi, this place is so secluded. How did you know?" Little Eight opened his mouth, but the words were stuck in his throat and he changed his mind. "I already knew." Her words were a little ambiguous, but Jian Fengqi did not hear it. He just thought that she had been here before. After all, with her temperament she was really capable of doing such a thing. However, this place is so deserted. Jian Fengqi did not delve into it and looked around. There was no one else here except for the two of them. Since Herb Mountain was fully opened, people could go in and out freely and basically go anywhere. Basically, people would set foot in every corner of Herb Mountain. However, this place was deserted as if no one had ever been here. Little Hachi shrugged. "Who cares? Anyway, we found the things, just take them." "How dare you?" A voice full of anger suddenly came from behind the two of them. Jian Fengqi immediately looked back and saw Xu Jing standing not far away, looking down at the two of them. Her carefully drawn eyebrows were tightly knitted, and there was undisguised anger in her eyes. Jian Fengqi elbowed little Hachi. Hey, the person you're looking for is here." Of course, little Hachi had already recognized Xu Jing's voice. Her red lips curled into a perfect arc and she slowly turned around. "Eighth Oracle, what a coincidence. Her voice was still soft and delicate. Those who did not know better would think that she was greeting a good friend that she had not seen in a long time. However, this voice was particularly harsh to Shu Jing's ears. Her face was cold. You are really getting bolder and bolder. How dare you trespass here? Do you know where this is? Little Hachi said honestly. I know. Isn't this Herb Mountain? Wasn't it just opened not long ago? Why are we not allowed to come here now? Shu Jing was so angry that her whole body was trembling slightly. This is the private land of the oracle. How can you step in as you please? Little Hachi and Jian Fengqi immediately understood. So this is your residence. I'm sorry, we really didn't know. Shu Jing was in charge of the affairs of Herb Mountain. She usually spent most of her time here. Even the other oracles did not set foot in this place. However, she never expected that these two people would come here just because she went back to the palace of the illusory god and came back a little late. You want to shirk responsibility just because you said you didn't know? Shu Jing was so angry that she laughed. Little Hachi spread her hands. Eighth Oracle, you said that this is your territory, but you didn't even leave a sign. Who would know? Shu Jing coldly reprimanded. Why not? The barrier outside. Chapter 23:31. Her voice stopped abruptly. She suddenly thought of something and a look of shock flashed across her eyes. Number 8 turned around to take a look. Barrier? What barrier? There was nothing when we came. As she spoke, she looked at Jian Fengqi. Don't you think so? Jian Fengqi nodded. That's right. We didn't see any barrier. If there was, they wouldn't have come here so casually. Shu Jing looked up in disbelief. The barrier in the distance had indeed dissipated at some point. Shu Jing's heart sank. How could this be? That barrier had existed for tens of thousands of years, and such a situation had never happened before. Little Hachi's eyes flashed as she smiled. Eighth Oracle, how long has it been since you came to Herb Mountain? How could you not know that your barrier has disappeared? Shu Jing pursed her lips tightly and didn't say anything. Then she said, in that case I'll let you off this time. There won't be a next time. After saying that, she turned around and was about to leave. She seemed to be in a hurry, as if she was in a hurry to do something. Little Hachi suddenly stepped forward and chuckled. Eighth Oracle, wait. Shu Jing turned around impatiently. What else do you have to say? If she wasn't in a hurry to confirm something, she wouldn't have let these two off so easily. Little Hachi said, it's not a big deal. Actually, it's not a big deal. I just have a few words that I want to talk to you about. Shu Jing frowned. What kind of medicine was this little 8 selling in his gourd? I don't have time to listen to your useless words. Shu Jing retracted her gaze and was about to leave. However, Little Hachi's words made her stop in her tracks. Eighth Oracle, I heard that you have been in charge of Herb Mountain for tens of thousands of years. Logically speaking, you should know every blade of grass, every tree, every mountain, and every river here the best. However, Eighth Oracle, you don't seem to be doing a very good job. These words completely ignited the long-suppressed anger in Shu Jing's heart. She abruptly turned around and questioned sternly, what did you say? The Herb Mountain was what she cared about the most. In the past few years, she had been trying to seize more rights, wanting to completely take Herb Mountain as her own and so on. It was not difficult to see this point. Therefore, she would never allow anyone to question her in this aspect. Previously, it was the God Monarch who had made a move. She was wary of him, so she obediently handed over all her authority. No matter how unwilling she was, she would never dare to go against that person. However, Little Hachi was different. Who do you think you are? How dare you talk nonsense in front of me? Shu Jing was so angry that he didn't show any mercy with his words. Little Hachi was not annoyed. She raised her eyebrows and said, if the 8th divine emissary had cared about Herb Mountain in the slightest, then Herb Mountain wouldn't have ended up like this. Don't tell me you don't know that. Wind seeds and devil's snare that are more than 100 years old are all gone? Of course Shu Jing knew. After all, she had kept a close watch on every single herb on Herb Mountain. However, she didn't care. So what? Then what? About? Little Hachi repeated her words. The smile on her lips deepened, but a layer of frost gradually gathered in her eyes. She sneered. Heavenly treasures are extremely precious, but it is precisely because of this that they have to be taken care of carefully. In the end, you harvested all of them and didn't leave anything behind? Eighth Oracle, even I understand this simple logic. How can you not understand it? The only explanation was that Shu Jing didn't think about taking good care of Herb Mountain at all. She just wanted to seize as many benefits as possible. Anyway, she definitely didn't lack herbs in her hands. As for the rest, she couldn't be bothered to care. Xu Jing was so angry that she laughed. She took a step forward and looked at little Hachi with contempt and ridicule. Since Herb Mountain is guarded by me, then it's not up to others to worry about these things. Whether Herb Mountain is good or bad, what does it have to do with you? Little Hachi's expression gradually turned cold. I know that you've recently broken through to Supreme Doctor and that it's time to show off. However, this illusory god palace doesn't lack a Supreme Doctor like you. Besides, you don't have a bloodline totem. Seeing the change in little Hachi's expression, Xu Jing was very pleased. During this period of time, she really had enough of all kinds of anger. She had long suppressed a stomach full of anger. Now that little Hachi had bumped into the muzzle of the gun, she naturally wouldn't let it go so easily. You and your arrogant and despotic master are just as annoying as you. You're just born lowly. Slap. Before Xu Jing could finish her words, her face was fiercely slapped. The loud and clear sound of the slap rang out, instantly freezing the surrounding space. Little Hachi had used all her strength in this slap, directly slapping Xu Jing's face to the side. It wasn't that she was weaker than little Hachi, but she really didn't expect little Hachi to suddenly make a move. Ever since Xu Jing became a god's messenger, she had always been high and mighty. When had she ever been slapped in the face like this? She covered the numb and painful half of her face and looked at little Hachi in shock and anger. Without thinking, she raised her hand to counterattack, slapping towards little Hachi's face. Little Adi clamped her wrist in a death grip. That pair of beautiful eyes, which had always been enchanting and seductive, was now filled with a biting cold. Chapter 23:32. Shock flashed across Jianfengqi's eyes. This pressure seemed to be coming from little Hachi? But wasn't she the exalted god? How could she cause such a big commotion? However, Xu Jing was still angry and did not realize that something was wrong. She clamped down on little Eight's wrist and raised her hand to hit him again. The sound of something breaking through the air suddenly came, and a folding fan hit her wrist hard. Xu Jing felt the pain and subconsciously let go of her hand. She looked at Jianfengqi angrily. You. Jianfengqi hurriedly said. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wanted to stop little Hachi, but I didn't expect to hit you. Eighth Oracle, are you okay? Xu Jing was furious. Jianfengqi was clearly helping little Hachi. Good. You two are really going to rebel. Little Hachi stared at Xu Jing. Her red lips curled into an enchanting smile, but her eyes were extremely cold. Oh, who did you say was going to rebel? Her voice was as soft and sweet as ever, but her tone now carried an indescribable majesty. Xu Jing's heart trembled as she subconsciously exchanged glances with little Eight. She did not know why, but when she met those cold and smiling eyes, she suddenly felt a strong sense of uneasiness. Those eyes seemed to be able to see through everything, straight to the deepest part of her heart. The bellflowers swayed, the stream flowed faster, and the waves surged. Little Hachi said, Xu Jing, this herb mountain, you are not qualified to be in charge. Xu Jing was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She screamed. If I'm not qualified, do you think you are? Little Hachi did not say anything and just stared at her. The letter hanging from her waist began to tremble slightly. The words on it were rich and bright, as if they were about to burst out of it. It seems that if I don't teach you a lesson today, you won't realize what you've done wrong. As soon as she finished speaking, Xu Jing's aura suddenly surged. However, little Hachi's face did not show any signs of panic. Instead, the corners of her lips curled into a mocking smile. Jianfengqi glanced at her and the corner of her eyes twitched. How could little Hachi still smile at a time like this? She was really not afraid of offending Xu Jing. Jianfengqi's figure moved, and he came to Xiaoba's side. He pulled her behind him and said softly, he whispered, Little Hachi, you're too bold. With this slap, how would Xu Jing take revenge on her? How would she continue living in the future? Little Eight, on the other hand, brushed his hair behind his back and smiled enchantingly. What's there to be afraid of? I'd like to see how she's going to teach me a lesson. Jianfengqi was about to say something when he suddenly saw a barrier slowly appear not far away. The barrier was pale green and had some strange patterns engraved on it. After taking a closer look, Jianfengqi realized that it was a Xian formation. However, this Xian formation was filled with countless patterns and lines. It was extremely complicated. If one looked at it for a long time, it would give them a headache. Jianfengqi retracted his gaze. He was still a little shocked. Is that the barrier that the 8th divine envoy mentioned before? Little 8 turned around to take a look as a smile appeared in his eyes. Jian Fengqi did not see her current expression. He was worried, but he still looked at Xu Jing. If it was a divine envoy, the two of them would definitely not be able to defeat him. They had to think of a way. However, at this moment, the power surging from Xu Jing's body suddenly dissipated into the surroundings. The power that he had just gathered dissipated silently just like that. Xu Jing was shocked. He widened his eyes in disbelief and looked at his hands. The pressure that he had accumulated in his palms was also annihilated at this moment. She panicked for a moment. Then she tried to mobilize the power around her body again. However, before she could do anything, the power dissipated again. Xu Jing's heart sank. Then she suddenly thought of something and raised her head to look ahead. The barrier had reappeared at some point. The power that had dissipated from her body was also quietly surging toward the barrier. It was the barrier that was forcibly depriving her of power. Xu Jing felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head. An indescribable chill suddenly surged from the bottom of her heart, causing her whole body to tremble slightly. This barrier, Jian Fengqi saw that her expression was not right. He also looked back and was shocked on the spot. Wasn't this the 8th divine envoy's barrier? Why did he suddenly turn around and attack her? Xu Jing suddenly turned around and left quickly. Her speed was very fast. Her footsteps were hurried, and there was a trace of panic and embarrassment in her back. Jian Fengqi blinked. She's leaving just like that? Didn't she say that she was going to teach them a lesson? And little Hachi's slap, was she going to take it for nothing? This 8th divine envoy is really interesting, Jian Fengqi said. He looked at little Hachi and asked with some concern. Although she's gone with her personality, she definitely won't let today's matter go. Little Hachi smiled. What are you afraid of? She's like a clay Buddha crossing a river now. She can't even protect herself. How can she have the time to care about us? What do you mean? Look at that barrier. She's in charge of looking after the herb mountain, but she can't even control this. Little Hachi sneered. I thought she was very powerful. It turns out that she's just strong on the outside but weak on the inside. What a waste of my feelings. Jian Fengqi, little Hachi. Don't you think you're getting more and more arrogant? How many people dared to scold the 8th divine envoy like this? Yes, she didn't just scold her, she even slapped her. Jian Fengqi felt that Xu Jing had probably never been bullied like this before. Just look at her expression just now. It was as if she couldn't wait to tear little Hachi apart. Little Hachi blinked her beautiful eyes. Her thick and curly eyelashes trembled slightly like small fans. She looked around and said modestly, I didn't. Jian Fengqi trembled all over. He cupped his fist and took a step back. My dear lady, let's talk things over. His little heart was still trembling when he thought of little Hachi's slap just now. Little Hachi snorted softly and walked back while twisting her waist. Jian Fengqi thought for a while and followed her. He asked with some concern. By the way, I'm afraid that Xu Jing will really hold a grudge against us this time. Little Hachi yawned carelessly. She's always been like this. What's there to worry about? What if she comes back again? Little Hachi waved her hand. Then I'll be merciful and give her another slap. 2 slaps will do. Any more and it would hurt my hand. Little Hachi looked at her hand with heartache. Look at how thick-skinned she is. My fingernails were almost scratched. Jian Fengqi, as the two talked, they arrived in front of the barrier. Jian Fengqi suddenly thought of something. He looked back and saw that the surrounding vegetation gradually stopped swaying. The waves in the stream also gradually calmed down. Chapter 23:33. Just like that, everything returned to normal as if nothing had happened. He frowned and glanced at little Hachi subconsciously. He wanted to ask something but he didn't know where to start. What should he ask? Should he ask if the commotion just now had anything to do with little Hachi? And the sudden appearance of this barrier? Jian Fengqi shook his head and dispelled that ridiculous thought. Xu Jing had said that this barrier had been here for a long time. How could it have anything to do with little Hachi? At this moment, little Hachi had already arrived in front of the barrier. When he was still 10 steps away from the barrier suddenly dissipated. Little Hachi waved at Jian Fengqi. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Jian Fengqi was stunned for a moment, but then he followed her. It was probably a coincidence. After all, when they arrived, the barrier had also mysteriously disappeared. Little Hachi, why do you think that barrier is not controlled by the 8th oracle? Isn't this her territory? Little Hachi smiled. How would I know? Xu Jing hurried back to the palace of the illusory god. She wanted to look for the first oracle, but halfway there she remembered that she had asked for an audience several times before, and without exception she had been rejected. If she went again this time, the result would probably be the same. Xu Jing gritted her teeth, turned around and walked toward the residence of the second oracle. Just as she arrived at the door before she could knock, she bumped into Yu Qian, who was walking from the other side. It seemed that he had just returned. Second oracle. Seeing Yu Qian, Xu Jing hurried forward. I have something important to report. Yu Qian was in a gloomy mood. He didn't want to pay attention to her, but when he heard her, he looked up at her and saw that her expression was not right, so he stopped. What's wrong? Just as Xu Jing was about to speak, her gaze suddenly froze as she saw a bloody wound on Yu Qian's hand. It looked like he had been bitten by something. Second oracle, the wound on your hand? Yu Qian's face darkened. I was bitten by a beast on the Divine Beast Mountain. Xu Jing was shocked. What? On the Divine Beast Mountain there were hundreds of divine beasts. They were all taken care of by the second divine envoy. Normally, these divine beasts were especially respectful towards him. Why did they suddenly go crazy this time? Yu Qian gritted his teeth. In fact, he hadn't been there for a long time. Today he suddenly thought of this matter and wanted to go and take a look. Who would have thought that one of them would suddenly attack and bite him? Even though he had already killed it on the spot, the wound was still left behind. Furthermore, because the bastard's teeth were poisonous, he had even specially used medicine. Therefore, when he saw Xu Jing at this moment, his mood was at its worst. These bastards are getting more and more impudent. How dare they bite you? Xu Jing's words made Yu Qian even more irritated. He asked coldly, Okay, it's already over. There's no need to mention it again. But you said that you have something to report. What happened? A trace of difficulty flashed across Xu Jing's face. She then said, Don't worry. There seems to be something wrong with the barrier on the Herb Mountain. Then she told Yu Qian what had happened. However, she deliberately skipped the part where Little Hachi had attacked. It wasn't that she wanted to cover up for Little Hachi, but as a divine envoy she had been slapped by someone who had just arrived at the illusory god palace and didn't even have a bloodline totem. This matter was too embarrassing in itself. If this matter were to spread, she would really lose her face. Anyway, she had plenty of ways to get back at him. After speaking, Yu Qian didn't speak for a long time. Xu Jing was a little nervous. Second divine envoy, what happened to your face? Yu Qian suddenly asked. Xu Jing was startled. Then she suddenly realized something. There was still a palm print on her face. She had actually forgotten about this matter. Just now she had rushed over in a hurry. Her mind was only thinking about the barrier. How could she remember this? In the end, Yu Qian saw it. Xu Jing lowered her head in embarrassment. Yu Qian asked, Was this slapped by Little Hachi? Xu Jing braced herself and nodded. Yu Qian suddenly laughed. Xu Jing, you are the 8th divine envoy. How could you be slapped like this? What are you doing? Seeing that Yu Qian was angry, Xu Jing's heart skipped a beat. It's because she attacked too suddenly. I didn't check in. Yu Qian looked at her coldly. Xu Jing's remaining words were suddenly stuck in her throat. Her face was green and white. After a long time she finally said, Xu Jing is incompetent. You are indeed incompetent. Yu Qian didn't give Xu Jing any face. You are the divine envoy. How could you be slapped by such a person? If this news gets out, the entire palace of the illusory god will be humiliated because of you. Xu Jing lowered her head and didn't dare to speak. How did you deal with that Little Hachi? She paused and lowered her head even more. Not yet. At that time the barrier suddenly, So, you were slapped but you didn't do anything in the end. You just came back like this? Yu Qian's eyes were opened. This was simply throwing the face of the divine envoy to the ground and letting others trample on it at will. Sensing his anger, Xu Jing clenched her fists, but didn't dare to say anything. At this moment it was useless to say anything. She couldn't pretend that what had happened didn't happen. Even if she went back and killed that Little Hachi now, she had already suffered this slap. This humiliation was something that would never be erased. Yu Qian took a deep breath. But that's not the most important thing. Xu Jing, after so long, you still haven't taken down that barrier? Xu Jing's face turned pale and her legs went weak. In the past, you tried to control Herb Mountain and did a lot of dirty tricks in private. I didn't care much about it. Because in my opinion, it's not a bad thing for you to be ambitious. At the very least, it can help you solve the problem of the barrier more quickly and smoothly. But now, You used public power for private purposes. Not only did you alarm the emperor, but you didn't make any progress on the problem of the barrier at all. Xu Jing, you disappoint me too much. Xu Jing almost couldn't bear the series of accusations and reprimands. After a while, she finally managed to find her voice. Second divine envoy, that barrier, I tried my best, but it's not like you don't know how difficult it is to deal with. Yu Qian looked down at her with indifferent eyes. Of course I know that, but I've given you more than 10,000 years and you still haven't solved it. This is no longer something that can be summarized with the word, incompetent. Xu Jing's nails dug deep into her palms, and she felt a sharp pain. However, she was almost numb at this time and couldn't care less about this. That barrier wasn't set up by me in the first place. It's so difficult to control it. I'm fine. Hearing that her voice was full of energy, Jian Fengqi was relieved. He wanted to go in and take a look, but he gave up in the end. He knew that Mu Hongyu had been cultivating recently, trying to break through to the Mahayana realm as soon as possible. She would encounter some troubles and problems. It was a simple matter. After thinking about it, Jian Fengqi gave a few more words of advice before turning to leave. When he looked back, Yanqing was already gone. You're really not worried? Jian Fengqi shook his head. Hearing the footsteps outside leave, Mu Hongyu hissed and gently rubbed her shoulders. The Mahayana realm was really hard to cultivate. She tried all kinds of methods, but she still couldn't break through. Instead, she would often run to other places for no reason. Fortunately, she hadn't gone to any strange places so far. But in this illusory god palace, she had to be extra careful. She indignantly took out the map that Chu Luiwe had left behind and started studying it. Phoenix Cry Mountain. The mountain breeze blew, and a tender green two-tian baby was swaying gently. Dumpling sat alone on the side, cultivating. Below her, there was a layer of reddish gold flames burning silently. The surrounding energy quickly surged into her body. The aura surged and the pressure was prominent. After opening her 7th meridian, her cultivation speed had obviously increased a lot. After all, even Yi Zhao had only opened his 7th meridian. Now that she had reached such a level before officially becoming an adult, it was really heaven-defying. After a long time, Dumpling finally stopped and slowly opened her eyes. Those big black grape-like eyes seemed to have become clearer and brighter than before, and a bright light flashed through them. So boring? Dumpling let out a long breath. Her small hands were holding her cheeks, and her chubby little face was full of worry. Although it was comfortable to stay here, it was really lonely to be alone. The key was that Ayu wasn't in the illusory god palace, and she couldn't find anyone to talk to. Dumpling sighed again. She suddenly sensed something and quickly turned her head to take a look. There was nothing behind him, nothing at all. Dumpling blinked. Strange. She clearly felt a pair of eyes looking at her just now. Dumpling's big eyes turned and retracted her gaze. She reached out and gently touched the two-tian baby's leaves. It grew very quickly here and now it had 5 leaves. Verdant and tender, full of vitality. As if affected by it, Phoenix Cry Mountain seemed to be more lively than before. At the foot of the mountain, some green sprouts had already grown on the originally bare ground. Although it had just grown out not long ago, it looked exceptionally pleasing to the eye. When will I be able to open my 9th meridian? Dumpling muttered softly. In the past, she didn't care much about this matter. Even if she knew that she had the purest bloodline, she didn't think too much about it. But now it was different. Only by opening the 9th meridian could he save Grandpa Chief. Moreover, only by being strong enough could he protect Ayu. As she spoke, she suddenly struck out with a backhand attack. A cluster of reddish gold flames flew out. Come out. Chapter 23:35. This time she hit nothing. No one appeared, not even a trace was left behind. It seemed like there was really nothing. Tuanzi didn't believe it. She stood up and ran over. Then she searched carefully in all directions. What, running so fast? She could not help but mutter under her breath. She was sure that someone was watching her in the dark. Unfortunately, she could not find out who it was. She put one hand on her waist and shouted at the empty void in front of her. If you have the ability to secretly watch me, then don't be afraid to come out. No one responded. Dumpling pouted angrily. I'm going to be angry. Still no one responded. Tuanzi was so angry that she turned around to leave and sat down again. Whoosh, as if sensing her anger, the energy of heaven and earth around Feng Ming Mountain suddenly surged quickly. In addition, the two Tian baby was also shaking, making the movement even louder. Puff. A reddish gold flame suddenly burned not far in front of Dumpling. Puff puff. With the first one taking the lead, the rest naturally flowed smoothly. A few more bursts of flames erupted from the mountain rocks. Soon these energies all rushed into Dumpling's body. They were purer and faster than the previous ones. Dumpling's entire body was quickly wrapped in flames, and her aura was constantly rising. She did not believe that when she was more powerful, she would definitely be able to catch the other party. God-slaying Mound. Dark clouds gathered and the sky was dark. Under the gloomy sky, the space distorted and turned into vortexes, crazily accumulating energy. And Chu Liwei was standing in the middle of these countless vortexes. She closed her eyes and her slender white fingers plucked the void. The sound of the zither rose into the air. And in the depths of this tomb, there was also a guqin music, which was constantly responding to her. Every note, every tone was perfectly matched. Chu Liwei's blood rushed in her body, as if something was about to break out. At a certain moment, the last guqin music finally fell, hovering in the empty and boundless wilderness for a long time. She suddenly opened her eyes. Then she waved her hand gently, and the countless vortexes above fell down one after another. One by one they entered the stone beside Chu Liue's feet. Countless holes were torn in the void and for a time violent spatial turbulence surged. At first glance, the surrounding space was like a soft and fragile piece of cloth that could be easily torn apart. However, these did not pose any threat to Chu Liue. Those terrifying auras only lingered in their own positions and did not approach Chu Liue at all. Of course, it was very likely that this was because the more terrifying part of the spatial energy was actually under her control. Chu Liue raised his hand. A stone at his feet flew over and entered his interspatial ring. Then, the second piece, the third piece. Chu Liue was a little worried that the interspatial ring would not be able to withstand the power and pressure of these stones, but he was surprised to find that his worry was completely unnecessary. The interspatial ring didn't seem to be affected at all when the last stone entered it. It was silent, tolerant, and powerful. She stared at the interspatial ring and then said to Rongxiu, "This ring is really much more powerful than I expected." This ring was given to her by Rongxiu, and it was the most precious treasure of the Yuntian Tower. Rongxiu smiled and said, "Yes. Of course, anything given to you is the best." Chu Liue's heart warmed. Then, she raised her eyes and looked forward with a slightly serious expression. Rongxiu asked, "Do you have the whereabouts of the zither score?" Chu Liue nodded and then shook her head. "Actually, if I'm not wrong, that zither score should already be in my hands." Rongxiu raised his sword-like eyebrows slightly. Chu Liue pondered for a moment as if she was thinking about how to explain. Every note of the last zither score is hidden in the void. So just now, when I used the two zither scores to summon the third one, such a scene appeared. The void was constantly twisting and collapsing, and vortexes appeared one after another. The third zither score was successfully summoned, but because it had completely merged with the void and was cut into 3,000 pieces, in the end, there was not a single complete piece. Of course, to be precise, there were the broken tombstones. Now they were all lying in Chu Liue's interspatial ring. In this way, it was not wrong to say that she had already obtained the zither score. It was just that she probably still needed to completely piece it together and reassemble it. No wonder Senior Ajing didn't notice the existence of the last zither score back then. Chu Liue rubbed between her eyebrows, feeling a headache. She was the last one to realize this. In other words, the last zither score hasn't merged with the first two. Rongxiu said. Chu Liue nodded. "I guess I need to wait until I can completely control these stones." However, those represented the power of 3,000 spatial forces. Even though she already had a close connection with these spatial powers, how could it be so easy to completely control them? Even the stones she obtained from the high god tombs were occasionally not obedient, let alone these stones. Rongxiu nodded, his thin lips curling slightly. "But the thing is already in your hands. Completely merging is only a matter of time." "Yes." Chu Liue let out a long sigh of relief. As long as she reassembled the last zither score and merged it with the first two, all the problems would be solved. Since this matter is over, we should return to the illusory god palace as soon as possible. I wonder how the two divine envoys are doing now. As she spoke, she saw Rongxiu raise his chin. "I'm afraid we'll have to wait." Chu Liue followed his gaze and raised her eyebrows. Lu Feng and Qi Han were still in the same place, enveloped in divine territory, constantly devouring the power around them. And the aura around them was several times stronger than before. Chu Liyue's eyes flashed as she murmured softly. Are they about to break through to venerable God? Digression, I'm going out today. I don't want everyone to wait, so I'll owe you one. Mwah. Chapter 23:36. As soon as she said that, Lu Feng's aura surged. Almost at the same time, a heavy pressure spread out from Qihan's body. The two of them had both broken through to God. Chu Liyue looked up at the sky. In the dark sky, the spatial rifts that had been torn apart were repairing themselves. But there was no Tianlei. Generally speaking, when one broke through to God, it would cause a huge commotion with the Tianlei. Those with greater talent and strength would even attract a golden Tianlei. Chu Liyue had been like that. But now, perhaps because the lightning pool in the illusory god palace was sealed, there was no Tianlei at all. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Although the two of them had successfully broken through to God, it felt like something was missing. After a while, the surging aura around Lu Feng and Qihan finally calmed down. The two of them stood up. Master. Chu Liyue's lips curved into a smile. You two are really efficient. The threshold to God was not so easy to cross. For example, little Hachi showed no signs of breaking through until now. Not to mention that the energy here was chaotic. It was rare to be able to break through under such circumstances. You two should follow us back to the illusory god palace later, Chu Liyue said thoughtfully. When the lightning pool opens, we can temper our divine bodies. The two of them answered in unison. Chu Liyue looked ahead. The black wall stood in the distance. After such a big commotion, Senior Ajing did not respond. Chu Liyue murmured strangely. She wanted to go and take a look, but after careful consideration, Chu Liyue dismissed the idea. Senior Ajing was powerful. If he did not plan to come out, he must have his own considerations. She did not need to disturb him. Chu Liyue made up her mind. Back to the illusory god palace. After making the decision, the group quickly returned. Since Lu Feng and Qihan had broken through to the god realm, they moved very quickly. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the shore of the illusionary god ocean. Unlike the bustling atmosphere in the past, this place was completely empty. At a glance, there was only a tall man standing with his hands clasped behind his back. This back view looked somewhat familiar, as if sensing their movements, that person turned around. Senior Mao Zhen? It was indeed him. Chu Lu was very surprised. Why did you suddenly come? Mao Zhen stroked his beard. This old man has already laid down heavy guards at Divine Dragon Island. I thought that I should come here to take a look, so I came over. Now, all the experts of the Divine Ruins world were heading over here. There was no need for him to say anything. With Mao Zhen around, Chu Liyue immediately felt more at ease. She nodded her head and looked around her again. Why are you alone here? Mao Zhen said, when this old man came, there wasn't anyone here. I was just about to go up when I bumped into you guys. Hey, where did you guys go? Chu Liyue smiled. Because of some matters, I returned to the god-slaying tomb. Mao Zhen was a little surprised. Didn't you say that the 7th Divine Envoy guards the Heavenly Gate very strictly? What? This doesn't seem to be the first time she came out, right? Is the 7th Divine Envoy so easy to talk to? Chu Liyue smiled and said, yes. Yeah, he didn't seem too happy. But so what? Mao Zhen was speechless. Looking at Chu Liyue's nonchalant expression, Mao Zhen deeply felt that her question was really not up to standard. I should have known that this girl wouldn't be willing to reason under such circumstances. What a coincidence that we arrived at the same time. Mao Zhen chuckled. Even though this old man has long heard of the illusionary god palace, this is my first time here. Chu Liyue had briefly chatted with him before. The great phoenix dragon's ancestor, Mao Lin, also came from the illusionary god palace. But later, these two ancient divine beasts left the illusionary god palace. Now Chu Liyue already knew some of the rumors back then, so he guessed that the departure of the great phoenix dragon and the crimson gold heavenly phoenix should also be related to that incident. But the specific truth was hard to say. Chu Liyue raised his hand. Senior Mao Zhen, please? Passing over the illusionary god sea again, Chu Liyue could vaguely feel that he seemed to be able to vaguely feel that several spatial forces below were intertwining with each other. In the silence, undercurrents were surging. Chu Liyue glanced down and frowned slightly. Rong Xiu noticed her movements and looked over. You are. Chu Liyue said softly, this illusionary god sea is really more powerful than expected. She had already faintly sensed that what she saw last time was actually just the tip of the iceberg. Diwu Zhangze was trapped in the deepest part of this sea. If they wanted to rescue him, they indeed needed to make sufficient preparations. Then they successfully reached the Silver Bridge and walked toward the Divine Gate. Just as they arrived in front of the Divine Gate, the barrier opened automatically. Chu Luiyue was stunned. The so-called Divine Gate doesn't seem that difficult to enter? As Mao Zhen spoke, he stepped into it. Mio, Chu Luiyue was about to stop him when he saw that Mao Zhen had already walked in. Then nothing happened. Everything was as usual. Chu Luiyue waited for a while, but the seventh divine envoy didn't appear. Mao Zhen turned around and waved at them. What are you waiting for? Come here. Rong Xiu held Chu Luiyue's hand and walked in. Lu Feng and Qi Han followed closely behind. After entering, Chu Luiyue looked around. This place was empty as usual, but there seemed to be a slight difference. It seemed to be more deserted than before. The seventh god is so busy that he doesn't even guard the Divine Gate? Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes slightly. Jin Yunlai wasn't such a person. Besides, even if he really had something to do, he could have asked the other divine envoys for help. But there was nothing. Perhaps he was delayed by something? Mao Zhen asked. What could be more important than guarding the Divine Gate? This was the only entrance to the illusory god palace. Its importance was needless to say. Swoosh. A sound of something breaking through the air suddenly came from afar. Chu Luiyue and the others looked up and saw a figure passing through the air, heading in the direction of the illusory god palace. Wait, the illusory god palace? Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat as he stared at that person. He didn't turn in any other direction. He was heading straight for the illusory god palace. Soon, another person was heading in another direction. He wasn't slow, as if he was in a hurry to do something. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. The illusory god palace was sacred and honorable. Most people here could only look at it from afar. What was going on this time? Chu Luiyue hesitated for a moment and said, "Let's go and take a look." It was just a short sentence, but it contained too much information. Chu Luiyue's heart trembled violently. Divine Master. If he didn't guess wrong, wasn't that the Lord of the illusory god palace? The Divine Master is coming out? No, Xiaoran said. The Divine Master is in charge of the palace of the illusory god and is extremely sacred. Other than the divine envoys, no one can see him. Besides, the Divine Master is extremely powerful. Even if he doesn't come out of the palace of the illusory god, it's easy for him to rebuild the divine body of the sixth divine envoy. Chu Luiyue pursed his lips and felt a bit disappointed. But when he thought about it carefully, it was actually normal. Even the palace of the illusory god was so difficult to enter, so the Divine Master was naturally even more difficult to meet. But, if this was a small matter for the Divine Master, he could have done it in private. Why did he have to make it public? And the sixth divine envoy? The divine envoys are all powerful people. Why doesn't the sixth divine envoy have a divine body? Of course it's because, Xiaoran paused, looked around and then lowered his voice. The sixth divine envoy used to have a divine body, but I heard that he went out of the palace of the illusory god a while ago, and when he came back, his divine body was already damaged. It wasn't a big deal. With the sixth divine envoy's identity and strength, he could go to the lightning pool and borrow the power of Tianlei to rebuild his divine body. But, isn't the lightning pool sealed? So now we can only ask the Divine Master for help. What happened to the sixth divine envoy that even his divine body was damaged? Chu Luiyue was very surprised. According to the ranking, the sixth divine envoy status was slightly higher than the seventh divine envoy. How did he end up in such a state? Who knows? Xiaoran shook his head. Let's go and take a look. It's rare to see the Divine Master personally take action. Perhaps it would be beneficial to improve your cultivation after seeing it? Chu Luiyue's lips curled up. Rebuilding a divine body, she was very experienced in this matter. But Xiaoran was right. After all, it was the Divine Master's action. The significance of it was incomparable. The group was about to go and take a look when they suddenly heard footsteps from the side. Chu Luiyue turned his head and saw that it was Yan Qing. Your Highness. He came in front of Rong Xiu and bowed respectfully. Then he handed over a letter with both hands. An urgent letter from the Yuntian Tower. Please take a look. Rong Xiu raised his hands to take it, opened it and glanced at it with narrowed eyes. A faint chill surged out of his body. Chu Luiyue asked curiously. Rong Xiu, what's wrong? Rong Xiu put the letter away. There's a small problem. For Rong Xiu to say this, It definitely isn't a small trouble. Chu Liwei said, then, do you want to go back and take a look? Rong Xiu shook his head. I'll go back to my place first. I'll find you after I've taken care of the matter. Chu Liwei nodded. There's no hurry. The Yuntian Tower is more important. As for the palace of the illusory god, she just wanted to see what was going on. Rong Xiu nodded and took Yanqing in another direction. Chu Liwei also looked away. Let's go. Let's go to the palace of the illusory god. Of course, they couldn't enter the palace of the illusory god. They could only stand outside the door. When Chu Liwei and the others arrived, hundreds of people had already gathered outside the palace of the illusory god. The place was bustling with noise and excitement. At this time they were all looking for something. Chu Liwei took a closer look and saw that there was a bronze mirror in front of the door, which was quietly floating in midair. A figure gradually appeared in the bronze mirror. Is that the sixth oracle? Chapter 23:38. Someone asked. That shouldn't be the case. Wasn't the divine body of the sixth divine envoy already destroyed? Someone in the crowd immediately retorted. Then who is this? I don't know. He looks quite young. I haven't seen him before either. The person in the mirror had his head lowered so no one could see his face clearly. However, Chu Liwei, who was standing behind the crowd, suddenly froze. That figure, that aura, she was clearly very familiar with it. A bold guess appeared in her mind, causing her to clench her fists. Her heart was hanging high in her throat. Following that person finally moved. He raised his hand and twisted his neck. His voice was lazy. So noisy, his voice was a little hoarse and he was faintly lacking in energy. However, that casual tone still shocked Chu Liwei. Lanxiao. It's really him. She almost couldn't control herself as she quickly walked forward. There were already several layers of people in front of her. Originally, she wouldn't have been able to squeeze in, but at this moment her movements were extremely fast and clean. Please make way. Hearing the voice, a few people who were curiously staring at the mirror turned their heads impatiently. What are you squeezing for? When they saw that the person standing behind was actually Chu Liwei, their voices stopped abruptly. Chu Liwei tried her best to suppress the emotions in her heart as she repeated herself. I said please make way. How can you be so rude when you're asking for help? That face of his clearly had the words, get lost, written all over it, alright? A few people were dissatisfied and muttered to themselves. However, they didn't dare to offend her, so they all made way. You please, who didn't know that Chu Liwei was extremely arrogant in the Illusion God Palace? She even dared to talk back to the seventh divine envoy? She probably didn't cherish her life, and her combat strength was extremely strong. If she really wanted to be unreasonable, who could do anything to her? Thus, due to various considerations, no one wanted to provoke her. If they could, they would. If they could, they would. Soon, a wide path appeared in front of her. Chu Liwei thanked them and walked over. Xuanhuan made a tisk sound. He had been in the illusory god palace for so many years, but he wasn't even half as intimidating as this little girl. There was really no comparison between people. Seeing that Mao Zhen and the others had already caught up, he also went forward with a smile. Thank you everyone. Thank you everyone. Many people around were secretly annoyed when they heard this, but they could only endure it. There was nothing he could do about it. There were some people he could not afford to offend. Chu Liwei quickly came to the front. Standing there, he was only 10 steps away from the bronze mirror. Thus, he could clearly see everything inside. Her eyes were fixed on the person in the mirror. At this moment, he was sitting on the ground with one of his long legs bent and his elbow resting on his knee. Even though he couldn't see his face clearly, Chu Liwei was certain of his identity just from his unique lazy and carefree aura. As if sensing something, he raised his head and looked over. A handsome and elegant face entered Chu Liwei's eyes. Her heart felt like it had been hammered by something. This was a completely unfamiliar face. She had seen countless faces that Lan Xiao had transformed into, but none of them were the same as this one. It turned out that this was his true appearance. But for some reason, the moment she saw this face, she was actually certain that he was him. Perhaps it was because that similar expression, as well as that playful gaze that had never changed from looking at the mortal world with a smile. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Chu Liwei couldn't help but take half a step forward. However, just as she moved, she was stopped by an invisible barrier. Xianhuan immediately asked in a low voice, Master, are you all right? Chu Liwei shook her head, indicating that she was fine. However, her gaze was still fixed on Lan Xiao. Obviously Lan Xiao could see her too. The moment their eyes met, he first revealed a hint of joy. Then he suddenly thought of something and a hint of anger appeared on his face. Chu Luiyue noticed the change in his expression. Just as she was puzzled, she heard Lan Xiao cursing in a low voice. Mother ***, how ruthless. His voice wasn't loud, but Chu Luiyue, who was standing nearby, heard it clearly. She frowned slightly. But in the next moment she knew why Lan Xiao had such a reaction. A long black whip suddenly fell and hit Lan Xiao's back harshly. Smack. The loud and sharp sound of the whip came suddenly and fiercely, instantly silencing everyone who was watching. Everyone was taken aback and subconsciously tensed up. Wasn't he helping the sixth divine envoy reconstruct her divine body? Then who was this young man who was being hit now? And this time it was extremely ruthless. With one whip, it immediately tore open the skin and flesh. Lan Xiao staggered from the hit and almost fell to the ground, but he managed to support himself with one arm. Dark red blood stains gradually spread from his shoulder. Even though the injury was on his back, everyone could guess how serious the injury was when they saw his pale face and trembling lips. The originally noisy crowd fell into dead silence. Chu Luiyue clenched her teeth and stared at everything in the mirror. Lan Xiao seemed to be trapped in a cage at this moment. The surroundings were dark and cramped, and there was only a lamp hanging on the back wall. But that lamp was obviously left behind so that everyone could clearly see Lan Xiao's battered and exhausted appearance. Other than that, there were no other clues. It was impossible to determine where this was. Smack. That long whip fell again. Lan Xiao regained his senses, clenched his teeth, and grabbed it with his bare hands. A muffled sound was heard. That long whip was caught in his hand. However, it was only for a moment. In the next second, that long whip was suddenly pulled out by an even stronger force, bringing a string of blood. Lan Xiao groaned, and his hand was instantly a mess of flesh and blood. The moment he grabbed the long whip, countless sharp barbs grew out of it. The moment he touched that whip, Lan Xiao knew it was bad, but it was too late to stop. In the end he was hit by this. Lan Xiao lowered his head and looked at his hand. The wound was badly mutilated, and it was so deep that his bones could be seen. Blood seeped out from the corner of his lips. He licked his lips, and the rich, sweet and fishy taste made his heart even more frustrated. Ha! Your methods are as dirty as always. Lan Xiao spat out a mouthful of blood, and his lips curled into an extremely evil smile as he scolded. Who was he talking to? The master god from the palace of the illusory god? But why did it sound like they already knew each other? Also, there seemed to be a deep hatred between the two of them. Chu Luiyue had never seen Lan Xiao have such a strong hatred for anyone. No one answered his words, but that whip was raised again and brought down. This time it was aimed at Lan Xiao's face. Chapter 2339. Lan Xiao cursed in his heart and attacked again. However, this time the black whip's speed was even faster than his. Smack. A bloody gash appeared on Lan Xiao's face. The wound was at least an inch long and instantly destroyed half of his face. Chu Luiyue's heart seemed to be clenched tightly by something. Lan Xiao usually cared about his appearance the most, especially his current face, which was only restored after he reconstructed his godly body. Just like that, he lashed out in front of so many people. The impact on him was self-evident. Lan Xiao tilted his head and didn't move for a long time. The crowd in front of the bronze mirror held their breaths unconsciously. Even though the whip didn't hit them, they still felt a chill down their spines when they looked at it through the mirror. If it landed on them, after a long time, Lan Xiao finally raised his hand and touched the wound on his face. It was extremely painful, sticky and sweet. The smile on his face gradually froze. Of course he knew why the other party did this. It was nothing more than using the most intense method to humiliate and trample him in all aspects. The other party knew what he cared about the most and purposely destroyed it. There was nothing more painful than this. Chu Luiyue clenched her teeth, and a layer of coldness enveloped her body. She had to expend a lot of energy to restrain her urge to rush forward. What kind of hatred did the godly master of the palace of the illusory god have with Lan Xiao? Why did he use such a method to deal with him? He obviously wanted Lan Xiao to suffer a fate worse than death. At this moment, a low and hoarse voice came from the mirror. These 3 whips are your punishment. This voice seemed to come from an extremely distant and empty place. Every word and sentence was divine and oppressive. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes instantly, and shock flashed across her eyes. This voice clearly belonged to the owner of that eye, Immediately after, the crowd behind her responded in unison. "Greetings, godly master." Instantly, it was as if a sudden clap of thunder exploded beside her ear, causing Chuliyua's heart to tremble. Godly master, godly master? She had long suspected that the owner of the eye had some kind of close relationship with the palace of the illusory god. Otherwise, the illusion of the illusory god palace would not have appeared in the Red Moon Desert. The owner of that eye had only decided to attack them after luring them into it. However, Chuliyua never would have thought that this person was actually the person with the highest status in the illusory god palace, and also the one who truly wielded power in the illusory god palace. For a moment, Chuliyua's mind was in a mess. Countless thoughts were overturned at this moment, and countless guesses gushed out one after another, filling her mind, causing her to be in a state of confusion. She took a deep breath. Compared to the previous time in the Red Moon Desert, the sound this time was actually a little different. It was less sinister and cold and more sacred and dignified. Suddenly, it was very easy to make people feel respect and admiration and be willing to submit. Lan Xiao sneered. Punishment? You think you can punish him just because you want to? Who gave you the right? Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. This person is so arrogant. How dare he speak to the master god like this? Xuanhuan seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and he looked at the person in the mirror suspiciously. Yes, it can't be. Hearing his voice, Chuliyua turned around and glanced at him. When she saw his expression, Chuliyua's heart skipped a beat. Senior Xuanhuan, you know him? Her voice was very soft, but the people around them were standing very close, so many of them heard it. Many people looked over. Xuanhuan looked conflicted. I'm not too sure either. I just feel that this person seems a little familiar. Chuliyua's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had officially seen Lan Zhao's face, so why would Xuanhuan find him familiar? He was a Shen master, so he definitely would not make a mistake in this kind of thing. What do you mean? Chuliyua asked sternly. Xuanhuan paused, hesitated for a while, and then said, From what I see, this person seems a little like Lord Second Priest. Second Priest? Chuliyua asked instinctively. Who is that? Xuanhuan pursed his lips. It was obvious that he did not want to talk about this too much. This was the first time Chuliyua saw such a worried look on his face. Suddenly, someone in the crowd asked in surprise. Second Priest. Is he the one who betrayed the Divine Master back then? Clearly, Xuanhuan was not the only one who had heard of this name. The crowd became restless. Seeing that the matter could no longer be hidden, Xuanhuan gritted his teeth and said, Back then, other than the Divine Envoys, there were also 2 high priests by the Divine Master's side. Because the Divine Master was indebted to these 2 for teaching him, their status was higher than that of the first Divine Envoy. But back then, for some reason, the 2 high priests and the Crimson Gold Celestial Phoenix joined hands and betrayed the illusory god palace. I thought that the 2 high priests had died in that chaotic battle, but who knew? He sighed. In that battle back then, countless cultivators in the illusory god palace were killed or injured. Even the divine envoys were all killed at that time. What? Chuliyua was shocked. All the divine envoys were killed? Then the ones now, they were chosen by the divine master later on. Xuanhuan said. That battle was very intense. Because he was young back then, he was lucky enough to escape death and only saw it from afar. But it had been tens of thousands of years and he could no longer remember clearly what happened back then. So when Lan Xiao appeared, he didn't recognize him immediately. But when he heard this voice, he recalled the past buried deep in his memory. Back then, this second priest was also so arrogant and unbridled. Because there weren't many people left in the illusory god palace at that time, and later the higher-ups ordered them not to spread the news, so no one dared to mention it again. Coincidentally, Xuanhuan was one of them. Chuliyua's temples throbbed, and the blood in her body was about to boil. She opened her mouth and asked, Then, what about the other high priest? You mean the high priest? Xuanhuan frowned and thought carefully for a while before shaking his head. That person made the same choice as the second priest back then. Since the second priest is still alive, then, maybe the high priest is still alive too. I just don't know why the divine master didn't kill the 2 high priests after they committed such a crime. Instead, he kept them until now and suddenly let them out? High priest, high priest. Chuliyua's heart seemed to be surging crazily. She tried her best to control herself and asked softly, Senior Xuanhuan, do you know the high priest's name? Xuanhuan shook his head. What kind of status did the 2 high priests have back then? How would I know this? Chuliyua didn't give up. Then, what about their appearance? Since you've seen the second priest, Then you should know the high priest too, right? This? Xiaoran thought for a while. I can't remember anything else. I only remember that the high priest wore the purple gold divine armor and had unparalleled divine power. Chapter 2340. In an instant, Chu Liyue's brain buzzed. Purple gold? Godly armor? She murmured subconsciously. Then she lowered her eyes and looked at the interspatial ring on her hand. There was a purple scale armor there, silent. Yes. Rumor has it that the purple gold godly armor was the #1 armor in the world personally forged by the high priest. It's a pity that the purple gold godly armor was damaged in that great battle, and the high priest himself. Xiaoran shook his head. 10,000 years had passed, and the few memories he had in the first place had also become blurry. However, the scene of the fire burning in the palace of the illusory god, the flames soaring into the sky, and the godly armor falling apart, was deeply engraved in his mind. Even though he hadn't taken the initiative to think about it all these years, thinking about it now still made him sigh. It's not just me. Everyone who survived back then also thought that the two high priests had died. In the years that followed, the divine master reappointed the divine envoys, but no new high priests were chosen. Naturally, there were even fewer people who brought this up. Chu Liyue fell silent and turned to look at the bronze mirror. High priest, second high priest, so this was the true identity of Debao and Lan Xiao. How were they dead? They were clearly suppressed in the Red Moon Desert and couldn't come out for 10,000 years. Chu Liyue was a little dazed and she couldn't recover for a long time. Ever since they were captured and brought to the palace of the illusory god, Chu Liyue didn't think that they might be from here. But she would never have thought that these two people would have such honorable statuses. Then, other than the two of them, what about Diwu Xiangxia? Thinking of this, she immediately asked. Senior Xiaoran, is there a third high priest in the palace of the illusory god? Xiaoran shook his head. No. After so many years, the palace of the illusory god only had those two high priests. Chu Liyue's brows furrowed tightly. If Diwu Xiangxia wasn't a high priest, then what was his identity? Why was he imprisoned in the same place as Debao and Lan Xiao? She faintly felt that she seemed to have touched on some long-buried truth, but at the same time, there were many questions in front of her, making it difficult for her to distinguish. She clenched her fists and took a deep breath. Only then did she gradually feel her strength recover a little. The amount of information she had just received was simply too much, causing her entire body to go numb. Seeing that Chu Liyue's expression didn't seem right, Xiaoran asked worriedly, "What happened to you?" Chu Liyue forced a smile and shook his head. "It's nothing. It's just that I suddenly know so many secrets. It's a little hard for me to digest them all at once." Xiaoran immediately understood. This was normal. It would be difficult for anyone to react quickly after hearing so much at once. He comforted her. Actually, it's all in the past. Don't take it to heart. Chu Liyue didn't say anything. This matter concerned Debao, Lan Xiao, and Diwu Xiangxia. How could she not care? No wonder the profound formations that Debao had given her back then overlapped so much with the ones on the star path. As the high priest, wasn't it normal for him to know this? She closed her eyes and tossed aside the distracting thoughts in her mind. Then she stared straight ahead. In the mirror, Lan Xiao sneered. He could hear what they were saying. His reaction had already explained everything. Lan Xiao, you betrayed the palace of the illusory god back then, which was a capital offense. On account of our many years of friendship, I didn't take your life. I thought that 10,000 years would be enough for you to reflect, but now it seems that you're still as stubborn as ever. Since that's the case, today I'll use your divine body to reconstruct the divine body of the sixth divine envoy. This way you'll die a worthy death. That voice was still dignified. Every word and sentence was like a holy judgment. Lan Xiao sneered and scolded, "Bah! I don't have any **T relationship with you. Don't **King flatter yourself. Oh right, I almost forgot you don't have a face." Smack. The black whip suddenly lashed out. After this whip flew out, it actually wrapped tightly around Lan Xiao's right arm. Drops of blood seeped out. Lan Xiao's facial features were distorted for a moment, and his face became even paler. It was obvious that this had caused him great pain. However, he actually endured it and didn't even let out a cry of pain. Chu Liyue's heart was in her throat. That person wanted to use Lan Xiao to reconstruct the divine body of the sixth divine envoy. What kind of method would that person use? After all, Lan Xiao's divine body was also reconstructed with great difficulty. Suddenly, her eyebrows twitched. Wait. There were 5 golden tianlei in Lan Xiao's body. Previously, Xiaoran said that the lightning pool had been sealed, so the divine master wanted to do it personally. Then, this time he actually wanted to forcefully take away the power of the Tianlei in Lan Zhao's body and let the sixth god use it. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared beside Lan Xiao without a sound. The sixth divine envoy. Someone in the crowd exclaimed. Needless to say, Chu Liwei could also tell that this translucent figure was the sixth divine envoy. But, why did it look strangely familiar? Chu Liwei subconsciously frowned. At this moment, the sixth divine envoy suddenly turned his head. That was a face that Chu Liwei would never forget no matter what. Her heart pounded as she blurted out in shock. Emo Shiqian? Chapter 2341. This person was indeed Emo Shiqian, who had self-destructed and escaped. Chu Liwei had been secretly sending people to investigate Emo Shiqian's whereabouts, but there had been no progress. She never expected that he was the sixth divine envoy. His divine body was destroyed, it was just that he had no choice but to self-destruct. Many people turned to look at her when they heard her voice. Xiaoran asked curiously. You know the sixth divine envoy? That person had just returned a while ago. Logically speaking, she shouldn't have seen him before, right? And looking at her, it was obvious that she knew him long ago. Chu Liwei pursed her lips tightly. I guess so. However, it was the kind of acquaintance that made enemies. Xiaoran was stunned. Chu Liwei sneered. They all said that the sixth divine envoy went out and only returned recently. But it turns out that he went to the divine ruins world? How interesting. Hearing her say this, Xiaoran suddenly understood something. So she had seen him in the divine ruins world? But looking at Chu Liwei, it seemed like she had a deep enmity towards the sixth divine envoy? He thought for a while, but seeing Chu Liwei's tense and cold jaw, he swallowed his words. Of course, Emo Shiqian also saw Chu Liwei. A deep sense of fear and dread flashed across his eyes. Then he remembered that they were already in the illusory god palace, and Chu Liwei couldn't barge in and do anything. Only then did he relax a little. Thinking about the situation, Emo Shiqian's lips curled into a cold smile, then he looked at Lan Xiao. Second priest, it seems that I'll have to trouble you this time. Lan Xiao sneered. Who do you think you are? How dare you fight with me? This golden Tianlei power, even if I take the initiative to give it to you, can you afford it? His words were full of ridicule and contempt. Obviously, he didn't take Emo Shiqian seriously at all. I heard that you died very miserably back then. Why, now that only half of your soul is left, what are you still dreaming about? These two simple sentences accurately hit Emo Shiqian's sore spot. Firstly, his status was indeed incomparable to Lan Zhao's. Secondly, as a god's messenger, he was forced to self-destruct and escape by Chu Liwei. It was indeed embarrassing if word got out. After all, at that time, Chu Liwei's cultivation level was actually lower than his. Of course, this was also because a portion of his memories and strength had been sealed at that time. It was only after returning to the illusory god palace that he finally recovered. However, this only made him even more terrified. Because only at that moment did he realize what he had done in the past and offended those existences that he shouldn't have offended. After returning, Emo Shiqian stayed in his room for a long time. He was always on tenterhooks, afraid that the punishment would come. But for some reason, after such a long time, there was still no movement at all. And now, the God Lord wanted to help him reconstruct his god body. He finally calmed down. This also meant that the God Lord had made up his mind to protect him. Therefore, when he saw Chu Liwei now, although he still felt fear subconsciously, he wasn't too worried. After all, everything he did was to help the God Lord snatch the Guqin score. Thinking of this, Emo Shiqian felt more confident. Second priest, when you betrayed the God Lord in the illusory god palace, you committed a capital crime. It's already the God Lord's mercy that you're still alive today. But not only are you ungrateful, you're also arrogant and don't have any remorse. What right do you have to criticize me? Lan Zhao's eyelids twitched. Dog, you're ugly enough. Don't talk so much so that you don't dirty my ears. You, Emo Shiqian was instantly enraged. No one would be happy to hear such words. But his rationality was still there. He knew that the more it was like this, the more he couldn't make a scene. Anyway, the God Lord and so many people were watching. This Lan Xiao could only be punished and humiliated. No matter how good his words were, the punishment and torture that he deserved would not be any less. Rip, there was the sound of clothes tearing. It was that black whip that wrapped around Lan Zhao's arm, and with a sudden tug, it tore his sleeve into pieces. Under the tattered clothes there were bloody wounds. Lan Xiao cursed and blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Chu Liyue's heart trembled. That person planned to tear Lan Xiao's arm off just like that. The 5 golden Tianlei turned into his limbs and essence core, which helped him reconstruct his divine body. Now that the power of the Tianlei was forcefully extracted, then Chu Liyue didn't dare to think about it anymore. Her mind spun wildly as she kept thinking. What other way could she save Lan Xiao? Countless thoughts appeared in her mind, but she rejected them. How could this be so easy? The person who wanted to harm Lan Xiao was the God Lord of the illusory God Palace. In this place, who else had a higher status than him? She couldn't do it forcefully. She might die before saving Lan Xiao. Who would be able to stop all of this openly? Lan Xiao gritted his teeth and used all his strength to resist. But everything was under the other party's control. If he could resist the other party, he wouldn't have been forcefully brought back and locked up. Now he could only hold on for a short while even if he tried his best. If this continued, crack. The crisp sound of bones breaking suddenly sounded. That arm of Lan Xiao's suddenly presented an extremely strange posture. The power of the black whip was too shocking, and it directly tore his arm off. The crowd quietened down. The atmosphere became deadly silent. Many people had complicated expressions and different reactions as they looked at the scene in front of them. All these years, the God Lord had been staying in the Illusion God Palace and had never come out. All the big and small matters in the Illusion God Palace were handed over to the God emissaries. Now that the God Lord finally made a move, he actually wanted to tear apart the second priest's divine body in front of everyone and forcefully extract his power to transfer to the 6th God emissary. Although the second priest chose to betray back then and deserved to be executed, this method was indeed too bloody and cruel. This was definitely more painful and torturous than killing him directly. Actually, to the many cultivators in the Illusion God Palace, they had seen all kinds of fighting and killing scenes. To be able to reach their current cultivation level, which one of them didn't have blood on their hands? But the scene in front of them couldn't help but make some people feel uncomfortable. It was good that the God Lord wanted to help the 6th God emissary reconstruct his divine body, but he obviously wanted to use this opportunity to punish the second priest and make an example out of him at the same time. But the God Lord was the God Lord after all. It was not up to them to judge what was right or wrong. Rip. A piece of flesh on Lan Xiao's arm was violently torn apart. The wound was so deep that the bone could be seen. A bright golden light appeared and flickered silently. Because he used the golden Tianlei to reconstruct his divine body, Lan Xiao's bones were also golden. Soon after, the black whip tightened again. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.